Hello everyone. I know I'm a little after the hour. Sorry, just messing with some wires. A little after. Oh, geez, of course. Immediately noises. Give me one moment, please. All right, so we're gonna get into it again today. I think the plan is going to be to go over one of the videos that we set aside from last time. Speaking of, yesterday went over some of the plans for the future, and I just want to come back to that really quickly because there are a few things I added that I forgot to, and also I know there are a few people here today that won't have been here yesterday. So if we take a look, one thing I forgot I wanted to add was a section called "These are the questions." I'm going to leave that extremely nebulous for now. Just know this will be a fun segment, and I do want to get to those in the future. But for the moment, we're just going to let you ponder what this is. I guess the little hint I'll give is this will be practicing uh, philosophy in silly ways. So we'll see. That's another thing that I eventually want to do, and I realize there's some concepts that I didn't talk about that are really that I do want to get to as well in my like concept document, um, which I never titled. Uh, Fallacies are going to come up. I don't want to be a fallacy bro. This is kind of a pernicious section, kind of thought that has pervaded, in particular, what has been accurately described as angry atheist YouTube. Fallacies are important. They're going to come up, but we're not going to. We're not just going to scream fallacy at people. We're going to want to address the arguments, and as they arise, maybe we'll populate this list. But more importantly, the concept of doing philosophy. I know oftentimes people look at philosophy as they look at it kind of like you learn history, or more often like you learn gospel, where it's a series of facts historically speaking, and this person thought this, and there's a lot of weirdness of like, wait, especially because science is taught very similarly, you're expected to treat it as true, even though a lot of these thoughts are not even the kind that can be true, so much as ways of viewing the world. I reject this framing. I think history of philosophy is important because it helps you see ideas that you might encounter ideas that you might not otherwise have, and it gives you a head start on, you can skip some of the things that people have up with already. You don't have to come up with the concept of like an infinite regression, but you can learn from Aristotle encountering it, and so it is useful. But I think the heart of philosophy, and this is the kind of thing that debates just are, and without saying this outright, felt a little like I was skipping something doing debate reviews, is philosophy is a process, much like science. It is a thing you do. It is applying critical thinking, logic, and other methods of thinking, honestly, uh, in order to explore different kinds of thought. And debate is a method of doing that, though it is more performative, so there are difficulties there. But philosophy is something that you practice. It should be something you do, not just something you learn facts about and rote like you would with learning something like the Bible. So this is going to come up a lot. Um, I'll fill in a little bit of this now since we're talking about it. So philosophy is a process, not merely a collection of thoughts peop, uh, people have had before. And this also should, I hope this clarifies something that might be confusing to people of like, okay, why do we care that, is it only important, is the thought only important because Descartes came up with it? Well, no. It should be that Descartes is considered important because he engaged in this process and came up with interesting and relevant thoughts. Now, obviously, there is an amount of like, okay, yeah, some people are important because they're rich or wealthy or what, rich or famous or whatever, and that's why it's relevant. But the things that should be important are why the thoughts are, and not merely reciting them. And so when people say something, well, so and so said this idea, that should be a reference to their argument and not used as an appeal to their credentials as an authority. This isn't the same as referencing or I guess it is the same as referencing scientific experts. You should be saying Stephen Hawking came to this conclusion, and it's not because he said it that it's true, but because of the work he did in deriving the truth of that statement that it becomes relevant. Because people say all sorts of things, and experts are can be wrong. It's whether the thoroughness of their approach is up to snuff. And with science in particular, especially with published stuff, this is where peer-reviewed papers and studies are so valuable, right? Is that we know that the process yields good results, and if they are not good results, we have methods of contesting them. Things aren't simply true by being ordained true. I'm not sure how to fill in an example. I'll do this off stream. That's not super relevant for the moment. So, with all that said, I think we can get into just one second. My phone's kind of blowing up with text. I will be right back once more. Okay, so now that we're back, we can. Oh, has my. Oh, did I go through all of that without actually showing my. Hmm, why is this not. Hmm, give me one moment. It should have been showing my Chrome window, but it doesn't seem that it was. No? Ah, there we are. Apologies. We should have been showing this. So, here are the plans for the future, very briefly. Just these are the questions, practice, and stuff, and then my concepts document, which not super important, but it was strange that it wasn't showing that on stream. My bad for that. So, that being said, I suppose we can get to the debate review. We're gonna go over an older one. I want to go over this for a couple of reasons. The first is that I do remember there being something interesting, a few things that were interesting about this debate in the specifics of what happened. I also know that there has been a bit of a how do I want to put it? There's been a bit of a stereotype of online atheists, in large part because of movements like the Four Horsemen of Atheists, or Richard Dawkins types, and following from them a lot of very angry atheists online. And I think it's good to go over what they were doing right and wrong. This will not be as great an example. I know that there's not that much vitriol in. I don't remember there being very much vitriol in this debate. Hitchens in particular was usually pretty good about not being aggressive towards his opponent, even though I do think he made a lot of really bad arguments. This is also why one of the other videos on our to-do list with Skeptic is here, is that since then I do know that there's been more of a change with some of the current atheist YouTubers that exist to not be nearly as abrasive or vitriolic. There was a lot of just people being assholes and pretending that like the soundness of their position would carry through that. And I understand there's also a bit of like of pushback against the religious zeal that has existed prior, but I don't know that that is always the best way to approach it, and it often it makes the arguments worse, and that is a can be a detriment to people looking for good arguments for the position. So we'll go over this. We'll see how much we get out of this. For a little bit of context, I'm not super familiar with Tariq Ramadan. I've heard rumors that go both ways, and because I'm not sure about it, I'm not going to repeat those here. I don't know how true they are. Um, I just know that he participated in this debate, and I think his stance here, if I remember correct, was pretty reasonable. No real issues with with how he comes off. I say this because oftentimes, unfortunately, people on the theist side of the debate are often truly repugnant people, and we're going to see that for sure in some of the other videos we have lined up, in particular with people like uh, the Muslim skeptic, Daniel. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Some of these people are truly reprehensible, and I make no qualms about saying something like that. As far as I remember, Tariq Ramadan, at least in this debate, was pretty reasonable. I don't know who he is outside of this, and we're not going to talk about it. That's not really relevant uh, because it doesn't, if I remember correctly, it doesn't really factor into the debate. Christopher Hitchens, on the other hand, was a writer for many, many years. I think journalist is an appropriate description of of what he did. This was towards the end of his life. You'll see he's bald in this debate, and that's because he was undergoing chemotherapy. That said, while his vigor might have diminished slightly, just a little less energetic than he had been previously, his arguments are on par with what I would expect from him. So while it is sad to see him in this as he is going, as a lot of people liked Christopher Hitchens a lot, uh, it if I remember correctly, it doesn't have an impact on his argumentation. The other thing I'll say about Christopher Hitchens, as far as the person goes, because we did so with Tariq Ramadan, is that Hitchens was a really smart guy, and like every person that's ever been, had a lot of really good ideas and a lot of really bad ones. So the ones that are going to come up here, well, I don't remember a lot of the details. I do remember some of them are good and some of them are bad. Most of the really bad ones that people take issue with don't come up. Things like supporting the Iraq War well after it was clear that it was on for bad reasons and without good intention or follow through. I understand that he had reasons that could be justifiable for the war in the first place. That's not why we were there, and this is something people have given him have criticized from him both during his lifetime and after. But he's also had some really good positions. He accidentally inspired Steven Crowder doing cosplay of him with his change his mind views, or segments where he pretends to have a changeable mind. Christopher Hitchens did do stuff like that. He used to take the position that waterboarding wasn't torture, and to prove it, he went and did it, and immediately changed his mind. He said, no, it is torture. I was wrong about this, and I think that's commendable. Changing your mind is important when confronted with evidence that is counter to your views, and that's something that I think is respecting a person for is worth respecting someone for, especially someone who is in the public eye. So while I'm not sure what my view of Christopher Hitchens in his totality is now, that is something I will always respect him for. I think that was an integrity move and something worth mentioning when we talk about Christopher Hitchens. So with that context out of the way, let's get into this and see what we can learn from this video. Quite an old one, if you notice. This was uploaded 10 years ago. I don't even know if this was shortly after the debate, but that's how long ago it was even uploaded.
6
It's
days
possible we'll
after the
do some
September 11th terrorist
skipping through the
attacks,
intros, but
it was
we'll see.
President Bush who went to the Islamic Center of Washington, D.C., and proclaimed that Islam is a religion of peace.
Oh yeah, that's important context. Somehow I missed what the debate is about for important context. So 15 seconds and we're already pausing. But yes, the discussion topic is Islam a religion of peace? Tariq Ramadan will be taking the side that it is, and Christopher Hitchens is saying it is not. This is a position where I think it is beneficial to do what I was giving Dr. Bergarden criticism for in his debate with Vosh, which is taking merely a negation position. Do not say it is in fact a religion of anti-peace or a religion of war, however you want to put it, of violence, however. Instead, to say no, it is merely not a religion of peace. I take that position because I think that. Oh, I just saw chat. Well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's important to discuss. Like changing your mind is important when you are wrong, and yeah, I like that. I'm glad you appreciated that, chat. But yeah, my personal position on this question, and again, we are not neutral. We do not go into these debates neutral. We're not going to pretend to be neutral when uh, when we when we have a solid position. I'm not hiding my views here. So it is my belief that no, Islam is not a religion of peace, but not that it is violent inherently, or at the very least, not more so than other religions. Religion has is a tool that can be used to do a lot of things. However, in my view, the way that religions work, generally by rote belief of some concept or other, makes it difficult for them to change, which means as morality and customs change, religion makes it hard for people to update their view of morality, leading to a lot of things that can be really bad. And it also is built in such a way where is very easily it can be very easy to use it as a tool for harm, but it technically doesn't necessarily have to be. I'm not super familiar with Jainism. You know, let's take a brief divergence. Let's do some wiki learning. I've heard of the religion called Jainism, as my understanding that it um, is very peaceful. Where if you were to maximize your beliefs as a Jain, you would end up doing the least possible harm. As far as well, we see this swastika here. As if I remember correctly, this is the original version, the one that is not Nazi affiliated. That the Nazis, in fact, appropriated instead. I don't know if it's unique to Jainism, but I know this is a symbol very often used in Southeast Asia to mean very much not what the Nazis used it to mean. But it's my understanding that Jainism, for example, is a religion that could not really be interpreted in a way to do harm unless you are doing what unfortunately a lot of people do and pretending it says the opposite of what it says. But the existence of a religion that does not do harm doesn't mean that the way it is that religions are built uh, aren't how do I want to put this? Doesn't mean that religions aren't built in such a way where harm is more likely than not. Uh, so we'll go to belief in philosophy because as I recall, or at least what I was told about it, is that the maximization of Janus beliefs is to not even take the risks of harming what are often considered insignificant creatures such as insects and whatever to like maximize your Jainism. You would uh, have trouble doing anything because you would try to avoid causing harm. Um, I don't see a brief like a very quick yeah. So main principles: non-violence, um, Jane ethics and vows. Cool. Like non-violence, non-injury, truth, not stealing. Celibacy is okay. This is see. Even here we found it. Even the religion I'd heard touted as the least likely to do harm. Like celibacy is not a harm, but imposing it on others can be. And so even we see here, right? Some hard and fast rule, if taken to an extreme, which religions often are, even if they don't intend to be, can be a real problem. And then non-possessiveness is fine. And this is what I mean. And so we'll see these things come up. And this is why I don't agree with the proposition that Islam is a religion of peace, but not that it's uniquely harmful. Maybe in this space and time, as Christopher Hitchens says, we see a lot of issues with it. But even 10 years ago, while I think you could make an argument for that, I know. Well, we'll save those thoughts for when he says it. Let's not preempt the whole thing.
At the time, the remark was barely a cause for controversy. Instead, it was greeted by most as a call to civility, a note of sanity, a warning to fanatics who might consider taking revenge on some innocent Muslim women shopping for groceries in a headscarf. But now, 9 years later, President Bush is widely accused, in retrospect, of having succumbed to a momentary case of political correctness. Many people now believe
I'm going to skip through some of this intro. I think I've done enough jawing on before the setup. The context she's going to give is going to be more for like the audience watching. Oh, we heard a laugh. What's going on here?
But the blame fell. The world did not blame Roman Catholicism.
Oh, okay, yeah, this one's good.
Prompt widespread rumination on whether Serbian Orthodox Christianity is a religion of peace.
There was some issue where
when Roman
they were
Catholic priests and bishops were complicit in the genocide in Rwanda, the world did not blame Roman Catholicism. But the blame fell. And they're laughing because
off-screen, Christopher Hitchens made it very clear. No, I did. And I think this is something that's definitely going to come up. I like that it's coming up already. A lot of times debates like this are actually hiding Islamophobia. They're actually, and this is why I like taking the mere negation position and not the opposite stance of like, no, it's a violent religion inherently. Christopher Hitchens, as will become more clear, does not have a problem with Islam specifically, and neither do I. It's not a matter of Islam being worse than other religions. It's just that religions have these inherent problems, and we're going to discuss them, making it clear that this is not an Islamic position to say, no, I did blame the Roman Catholic Church. I thought they did demonstrable harm there, is something I both agree with, but also I think very good to make clear from the outset. We're doing it in a joking way, and I don't think it ever becomes explicit, which maybe it should have been. We'll get to that when we discuss Hitchens' opening. But I like that it's already coming up. This should not be taken as an attack on Islam, and especially not on Muslims, who, like everyone else, are just people, as capable of good or ill as anyone else. But the problem is an ideology that can encourage and incentivize violence, which is a problem not of Islam, but religion, which Islam happens to be one. This is not an attack on Islam or Muslims.
God is not great.
No, that's the name of one of Hitchens' books.
For most.
And this is one of the things people loved about Hitchens, and I'm not gonna be able to avoid it. He was incredibly charming. Very he could make you laugh by doing almost nothing. He just had this charisma about him, and it's coming out like the moderator. He didn't even do anything, and the moderator can't help but laugh about what's going on here. I think Tariq is laughing because he's a funny guy, or he was, and it's hard not to find him at least in some way endearing, even if you disagree with him vehemently.
Readership. The blame fell on a few rogue clerics. Why do we make such fine distinctions when it comes to other religions, but not with Islam?
Okay, we can go back to skipping. Just want to get to the actual debate portion. So this, I think, is it's weird that nothing has happened, and I'm seeing things to talk about. I think this is a failure of the debate format that is going on here. Generally speaking, the affirmative should take a position that if you are in agreement with this, the implied agreement position would be yes, Islam is a religion of peace. If Hitchens was taking the position that it is a religion of violence, then it would be reasonable for him to start, or for Tariq Ramadan to start. Either one, it's fine. But uh, given that he is not going to do that, and maybe they didn't know, but even if they should have asked, Tariq should be starting. This should be establishing his reasons for why this is the case, because Hitchens might have nothing to say, but no, it isn't, and I can demonstrate why these things are wrong, and maybe how it is capable of both violence and peace. But instead, we're starting with Hitchens, who should be taking a negating position. It's a little weird.
Assalamu alaikum.
Probably shouldn't work this way.
Shalom. Welcome back to the United States. Thank you, Laurie, for your introduction. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. I have to be brief, so I'll be terse. Like a number of people who are students of religion, I've spent a lot of time lately, as you should if you have the opportunity, I recommend it very highly, with Professor Dermot McCulloch's History of Christianity. Marvelous work of scholarship and literature, written by a mainstream believer, extraordinarily broad and deep, in which he ponders one very important question, the only one I've got time.
Oh, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, this lapel pin that he is wearing, and he wore for many years before he died, is a Kurdistan flag, a Kurdish flag, if I remember correctly. I just want to see the flag. I believe that's what that is. It looks similar. I believe this is a Kurdish flag. And the reason behind this is he was a big supporter of Kurdish independence. I am not super up to date on what's going on with the Kurdish people, but it's my understanding that they are a highly oppressed group in Syria, I believe. They've been fighting for independence, and Kurdistan, as far as I'm aware, is not a country. But there's an independence movement, and there was then. He was a big supporter. This is something that I think is important to note, because even it is another indication very clearly that there is no that this is not a xenophobic or racist position that he's taken. I don't know if Kurds are Muslim, so I don't know if this is an Islamophobic thing. Let's see if we can do a quick Google and find out. Well, the images aren't going to help us here. Okay, they are Muslim. Now he's not doing this for like the virtue signal or whatever. Like I said, he wore this for years. Big supporter of this, but this is something to keep in mind: is we have made a huge departure from people like Christopher Hitchens, who is my understanding described himself as a conservative, to the positions held today, where people might try to sound like they're taking his positions, but he is not principally Islamophobic or xenophobic or racist. He is very much in support of people who are oppressed. He often had views I don't understand how he could square with positions like this. But I just wanted to point this out. This is a small thing, but it's something he was often commended for this show of support for something that we barely hear about now, if at all, or at the very least not in mainstream discussions. And Hitchens, a writer for Vanity Fair, a well-read writer, was trying to support. And I think it's valuable that he did that.
Time for now.
Is it Iraq that they're from? I'm not actually. I don't. Oh, shoot. All right. What? All right. We're. All right. Oh, it is Iraq. Okay, my mistake. Not Syria. Iraq. That's my bad. Maybe it's that Syria had fights. I do remember hearing about some like issue of like Syrians fighting with Kurds, but maybe I'm just remembering incorrectly. Apparently, this is in Iraq, so my mistake. Thanks for correcting me on that.
What happened to the word Christendom? Remember, there used to be such a term. It used to extend across the world, and the hope is that it would extend even further. And it was unironically used to mean those areas of human civilization, and areas yet to be civilized, of course, where the word of Jesus Christ reigned or would reign. And it's all gone. The word is never used except historically or sarcastically now. And McCulloch doesn't say it ended because of the Crusades, though he could. It didn't. Crusades didn't kill it. Not because of slavery, mandated by Christianity. That didn't kill it either. Nor the mass murder of colonial subjects in the yet-to-be Christianized world. That wasn't sufficient.
So what we're seeing here, and I do want to pause before we get drawn in too much, because this is something that Hitchens was very good at, and I do want to disrupt it a little bit because I don't want us too much to fall into the whirlpool of charisma, as it were. His debating style is very much making you feel like he's just talking with you in a context where it would be a little weird for you to pipe up. Like maybe he was talking to like 3 or 4 people about his expertise on a subject. This is very good for drawing an audience in. He, like many people, is very much interested in... I don't even know. I was going to say he was interested in being effective in his as opposed to making the best arguments. I don't even know if that's accurate. I think he just wanted he generally just wanted to state his positions, irrespective of the strongest arguments, but in a way that is compelling. And because his style is more like conversational, one-on-one speech, it feels very, very much like he's talking to you, which can be a good thing. Like it definitely is very good for stage presence. It is not for the best for making the best argument, but remember that's not necessarily the correct approach. Remember, on this channel we want to discuss what the best argumentation is, not the best way to debate. Those are not necessarily those are not necessarily the same thing. And so while this is very compelling and draws you in, just remember that there is... Some people would call it like a slimy debate tactic. I would call it affect, and one of the types of arguments to remember is pathos, is just appealing to the emotion. Understand that people are more likely to agree with you if they are emotionally in sync with you than if they're in a setting and you're screaming at them. This is more effective, if not better argumentation. So this is why he's kind of jawing on like this.
See, it didn't really end, he said, till 1914, when all the Christian empires of the world, Austria-Hungary, Germany, France, Britain, France is a slight exception to this, but only a slight one, and Russia, all of them commanded by Christian emperors, and calling upon their subjects as Christians, went to war with each other and very nearly destroyed the whole human civilization, and certainly reduced it to a point where we can't guess where we might be.
Here we have like a little bit of argument by implication, the harm that religion can do.
The terrors of fascism
but we'll see if that's what he derives from it.
Of which it was the seedbed as well. I mention this partly because I want to maintain that there's no such thing as a religion of peace by definition.
Yeah, and so he does make it explicit. I'm glad he did that. This is not... well, I guess it's not as explicit as I would have liked, but he's saying it's not used specifically. There's no such thing as a religion of peace. And if that's the case, then Islam cannot be one. This is more of an affirmative position than I think is strictly necessary, but because it is a more affirmative position, it does make a little bit of sense that he's speaking first here.
Second, to point out, and that its best historian has to admit something that if I was a Christian would make me humiliated. But because there was another empire involved in that war, the Ottoman Empire, which also came to an end, its other name was the Caliphate, the Muslim Caliphate. It went to war on the side of German and Austrian imperialism and Hungarian imperialism, and it lost not just the war, having proclaimed a worldwide jihad against Christianity, except for German and Austrian and Hungarian Christianity, which were its allies. And it didn't just lose the war, but by 1924 had been dissolved by the Turkish leadership, by Ataturk. It lost the Caliphate. And that's the only one that still has supporters. The other Christian and religious empires have all gone. But the caliphate still has fans, not just in the Muslim world, sometimes referred to by Muslims as the Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, but also in what some Muslims call the Dar al-Harb, the House of War, the part of the world that isn't yet Muslim. There are caliphate clubs in London now and Berlin. And
So I think we're going to have to do a lot more translation with Hitchens' arguments because he makes them less in an argumentative form and more, as I say, conversationally. This is going to be, it's often how people talk with each other is you present a lot of ideas with the point being the implication. And we see that here. I think the implication he's making here is that while much of the world has moved on from the pseudo theocracy or actual theocracy that used to be, that there is still this remnant in the Muslim world. Now, this isn't. I don't think he's saying that this is a. I don't think he's using this as a condemnation of Islam specifically, so much as to say this is just where we are. I think it is better that we are no longer that we are less theocratic now than we once were, and this is a place where it needs to be made, or maybe not needs to be made, but it would be better if it were less theocratic than it is now. That said, I think a trend that Hitchens was able to see, the reduction of religiosity in the world and the sway of religion has shifted in the last who knows how many years. There's been an enormous rise of evangelical fervor in the United States in particular. Christian fascism very much on the rise, and I'm curious what Hitchens would have thought of that and how this would factor into his view, because it seems to be that he is implying this progression out of religiosity as a cultural force that simply has not happened in the Muslim world, but as we're seeing, it is not. It's not. We're not fully climbing out of that necessarily. There is still a lot to be done there, and I wonder if he would have revised his view as to which religious groups were most pressing issues at the moment. I also know, again, that Hitchens was a conservative, though maybe that was more conservative as British would call conservative, which is still towards the Democrat side of things in America. So I don't actually know, and I don't want to speculate, but I think the implication he's making here is this progression away from religious force in the world, and that he would like to see more of in the Islamic world.
and elsewhere, quite important ones. And what I want to know is why that is and what we should think about it. Believers in this fantasy have, Laurie's spared me the need to say much of this, have committed extraordinary atrocities in Istanbul, in Madrid, in India, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, and of course in our own fair city. And the pretexts for it vary. They can be, the excuse for the mass murder can be that Australia has helped East Timor become independent from Indonesia. They can be that Newsweek has printed a false story about the desecration of a supposedly holy book. You never know what it's going to be next. But everyone knows to be careful about it, and everyone understands that the threat of violence that backs it is believable. And that's my opening position. Now you will say...
So he says that's his opening position, but let's be clear. Like, what did he actually say? What he didn't say was what. Let me slow down. What he didn't say is anything that could be regarded as a thesis, as something that is an actual position, except by implication. You could interpret it in a few ways. I think the uncharitable reading might be to say he's implying that no, Islam is in fact very violent. I think more accurate to his position is that he is saying that it is clearly capable of violence, that the idea of Islam being peaceful does not track with its impact on the world, that there is a violent aspect to it, and so cannot be reasonably regarded as a religion of peace. Now, he might follow up and clarify and say, like I would follow up and clarify. Let's say, I think he would agree that it is not exclusively violent nor unique in this respect, but it clearly has violent tendencies that express themselves in the world. This is a little bit of a weak argument simply because of the method that he's using to arrive at the conclusion, right? That we see the violence that exists. Well, I mean, someone could make the argument that adherents can do things that isn't true to the religion. And I don't love this argument because at some level, a religion is what its adherents believe and do. Uh, and you would have to find maybe you need just textual justification, but of course, textual justification is often met with the claim that this is misinterpreted and this is not how people view it. So you have kind of this conundrum. This is part of why I think speaking second makes more sense for this position, not as a tactical position, but simply as a matter of you have to respond to the arguments that are made, and if there aren't any made yet, then you can't respond to them. So seeing which position Ramadan will take and how he will approach the position that it is a religion of peace is how you should format your response. And in fact, in competitive debate, something that people would sometimes do, and it works better on the negative when you're speaking second, is having multiple different cases for why for your negative position, and to choose the one that makes more sense in context, because it just doesn't make sense, for example, to argue about what its adherents do if the only position is what the text says and that the adherents are in the wrong. You have to respond to the arguments being made and not simply talk past each other.
Hey, I can hear it already being said. You may be saying it already to yourselves because the defense mechanisms kick in. And in any case, Laurie already said it for you. And I hope Professor Ramadan won't feel the need to say it again. But if he does, fair enough. You may say, that's not the real Islam.
And there we go.
Those aren't real Muslims. Now, isn't that a fascinating objection? Is there anyone in this room, I exempt Professor Ramadan, because
that the counter-argument will be those aren't real Muslims, and not that they are misinterpreting the text. To say those aren't real Muslims demonstrates a frivolity, to say like, oh, you're simply excluding the people you don't like, whereas the stated position, the stronger version of that position might be that the people who interpret the text that way are in the wrong in a factual level. This is a small amount of non-charitable interpretation that isn't a problem here because his opponent hasn't yet made a claim. It's only the beginnings of a problem, but this is something that I've generally taken issue with in how Hitchens approaches things, is that he's not always as charitable as I think he ought to be. In certain contexts, that is very reasonable. There were debates where he had with Dinesh D'Souza, who at the time I did not realize the full extent of how bad that guy is. Maybe we'll watch one of those videos. But in a conversation with D'Souza where he is not going to be speaking of good faith, he is not going to be charitable, you might need to engage in dishonest rhetoric and bad faith responses just to be effective. Because his opponent hasn't said anything yet, that might not be warranted, and you just need to approach things in accordance with the tone of the discussion. I suppose you can also set the tone in this way, and by doing so, it is a very minor dishonesty is definitely better.
To speak next. Is anyone in this room who would care to arbitrate that question? Who is to say?
This is the no true Scotsman fallacy, of course.
Who is a true son of the prophet or true interpreter?
Though, of course, with religions, you can always go to the text to determine
who's part of the problem, because it is a religion,
interpreting correctly. But
is that it's perfectly true to say we don't know who the true Muslims are. How right that is. Who does speak for it? Only the second problem with defining Islam as peaceful, has to do with the fact that it's highly fissile and highly schismatic, that there is a civil war going on within it, the religion of peace. as we speak, at least one civil war between the votaries of this religion of peace is already taking place, and some of it is exported outside that world into ours. Very salient fact. The first reason, though, is this. Islam makes very large claims for itself. Very large claims indeed. It claims to be the last and final religion, the last and final revelation. When you see bumper stickers, everyone says you can't reduce major things to a bumper sticker. It's not my idea to have bumper stickers saying Islam is the solution. It's a well-known slogan, actually, of parties associated with the Muslim Brotherhood.
And this is something that I like his approach here. We'll let him finish. I just don't want to let it run too long without commentary. I don't want to seem like you're just watching me watch this without response. But this is where it gets back to the issue to take with Islam is just an issue of religion. There are going to be claims that are unjustifiable and often very large claims, very impactful claims, and often ones that can be where the risk of interpretation could lead to some really negative outcomes. So when you say something like religion is or Islam is the last and final religion, that is not inherently a violent statement, but it is so capable of being interpreted in a violent way. It is so vulnerable to that kind of interpretation that having that be doctrine is dangerous. And this is perhaps where he'll go with this. I don't remember exactly, but this is the issue. I like that the issue here that he's drawing here is one of just that it makes claims that can be interpreted badly is a problem in itself, and it kind of doesn't matter how you think it ought to be interpreted. It is able to be interpreted badly.
They say Islam is the solution for everything. It takes care of all your life and the one to come. Sexuality, political economy, banking,
and we will
diet,
see when we
relations with other religions, everything.
Encounter instances
of total solution.
the Muslim skeptic that people do interpret these things.
It's
in
the
really
first 5 letters
ways.
of the word totalitarian. It's absolute. It's absolute. It's all-inclusive. It's unanswerable. And oddly, for a religion that makes such large claims, notice another thing about Islam. It doesn't particularly like having these claims questioned or scrutinized. In other words, just as there is with all religions, an inverse relationship between the claims they make and the evidence they can produce for them. You must have noticed that. With Islam, a younger religion, and perhaps therefore more in its first flush, there's an extraordinarily...
So it's a minor flourish that he has there, but this is something I've considered for quite a long time, and I wonder about. I mean, I don't have the academic background, nor the education, nor have I done the research to back this up. So consider this only speculation and not statement of fact. But I do wonder if religions go through life cycles with go through life cycles in a similar way that living beings do. There is a tendency, for example, or maybe I shouldn't say a tendency. We have seen, for example, that Judaism was, at the very least, I'm not sure if the history backs this up, but at least what is written in the holy books it was very violent and very territorial, and in a way that you would expect for the time, but still, very violent, territorial, and then, had reformation, sometimes forced, like through Roman occupation and the destruction of the temple, and now there is this trend. There have even been articles written of, do Jews have a gene for atheism, where there's this trend for Jews to be more and more atheist as time goes on, more than other religions, whereas with Christianity there was that surge of violence that we saw in the Middle Ages in particular, and then that's sort of calmed down a bit since then. Now, of course, it's on the upswing again, but it is certainly more calm now than during the Crusades or what have you. And I have to wonder if Islam, being a young religion, is simply in the earlier stages. Now, this is very reductive and, again, mere speculation, but it's something I wonder about. And it's kind of interesting that he seems to have add that flourish there too.
Strong willingness to say that any challenge to its absolutist claims is by definition profane. And profanity and blasphemy can be the antecedent to very severe punishment, and often are, for Muslims and for non-Muslims. And this is not a road of peace, in my submission.
Something to remember is that so as I understand it, there are prescriptions for in Muslim religious texts. I don't know if it's in the Quran, hadiths, what have you, but is my understanding that there are prescriptions for what to do when encountered with someone who blasphemes or disagrees or an apostate and whatever. And as I understand it, those prescriptions can be quite violent. But someone could argue that those should be interpreted differently to be not as violent. Maybe the idea of like of maybe the idea should be to like kill their idea in the free marketplace of ideas or what have you. But for Hitchens in particular, you have to remember that free thought and free expression are hugely important factors as far as he approaches things. Hugely important political rights that he feels ought to be had, and even if the prescription is it's better not to think these things, I think he would take issue with it. So remember, like this, where he's coming from is that no matter what the response is supposed to be, that there should be a response to certain kinds of thought is something he was always going to take issue with.
Thus my first point completed. The claim to govern everything from hygiene to sex and the afterlife, which contains detailed prescriptions for the good and bad versions of itself, again strikes me as somewhat totalitarian, and they're both based upon two very, very questionable and not very peaceful concepts. One is the idea of a perfect human being, the Prophet Muhammad, and the other is the idea of a perfect book, the Quran, the recitation. Now, the category perfect human primate,
this is another instance where a large
category
claim interpreted poorly
possibly
or even
not use
interpreted
any
well
kind of change,
could be very
revision,
dangerous.
or editing are categories that do not exist. There are no members of these categories. Therefore, any challenge to this faith is bound to lead to heresy and to schism. And
I think this argument is honestly weaker than the one he could have made, where he draws upon what he has already said, that these large claims are dangerous in and of themselves. I know that the idea that that they're bound to be interpreted, or they have risk of being interpreted poorly, is something I presented and not Hitchens. But even just presenting the idea of, pick any person and claim that they are perfect is potentially very dangerous, because everyone has done something that they shouldn't have done in their lives. Everyone makes mistakes. There is no perfect person. And to deify a life in that way implies that even those things that are wrong could be okay. And this comes up a lot with Muhammad, given that he had a child bride, and this is something that different Muslim apologists have had to respond to in different ways. Some of them much worse than others. I'm thinking again to the Muslim skeptic Daniel, whatever his last name is, and that's the risk, right? That it can be. You can say, well, he did it, and this is a perfect life, so it's bound to be okay. And it is always going to be worse to do that with someone further back in the past, where morality has changed a lot. It was okay-ish. It was more okay then to do a lot of the things that people did, and not as okay now. And like to say this is a perfect life is very, very dangerous.
does. And just as all forms of absolutism and totalitarianism, leader worship and revealed truth, unalterable text, always do, because they can break, perhaps, but they cannot bend. And thus the latent potential of violence between them, among them, as well as within them, is very great. And at any moment, someone is in danger of being accused of being an apostate or an unbeliever.
And this is where
This
authoritarianism
week,
comes into his mindset. Hitchens was also very anti-authoritarian, at the very least in what he spoke about. I don't know about the governments he supported, but uh, this comes back to what I was saying about freedom of thought and freedom of expression are very important to him, and so the implication that tyranny is going to set off alarm bells for him. This comes up a lot in his other debates, where his primary avenue of debate is to warn against the authoritarianism he sees, particularly in religion, but in other things as well.
the Coptic Pope of Egypt, Pope Shenouda, who represents 10 million Egyptians, was hustled onto Egyptian TV. He's not asked on all that often. I don't think he was even asked on this time. I think he was told he'd better come on. Why is the leader of Egypt's
And this is what I would call a journalist's argument, an argument by example?
Because one of his bishops had said
ultimately it's an anecdote and doesn't prove anything,
that he thought that some of the verses
but
of the Quran showed
paints a
signs
picture
of having been
that gets the idea
added
across to
later
the audience. It can be effective, but it is not a good
and to have
argument.
been later accretion. And Pope Shenouda was forced onto the television to say, it's not that that didn't happen, it's it couldn't have happened. It shouldn't even be discussed. So that it has to be claimed even by non-Muslim subjects of a Muslim state that there is, after all,
But it's
no
a good
Christian claims
example,
this about
at the
Bible
very
anymore,
least,
no
of the
Jew
danger
claims it about the
posed, right?
Pentateuch. After all,
That
yes, there is just one book
this is
that's
possible.
completely word and letter perfect from the first time it was not even written down, but recited. Now, demands that you believe the impossible do not lead to peaceful outcomes. Nor do they lead
You see
to
what I mean
peaceful
about
or
the freedom of
tolerant
thought
regimes.
being dangerous in itself,
I'm
and I
not
agree.
going to ask you which Muslim country
This is what's
you would
factoring
like
into
to
how
live in.
he's approaching
I
things.
don't know whether Professor Ramadan will tell us which one he would pick if he had to, because I don't have to ask you a question like that, because it's already in your mind.
Can you wind up now?
Yes, I can. I can, yes, and will. Shall, in fact. Sexual repression doesn't lead to peace.
No, I'll let him finish.
The idea that
before I get
women
into
are
it.
inferior to men is a profound cause of unease, let's say.
Well, I agree with his position, and it's not actually
all religions
hypocritical. I
make
do
some
find it
form
funny that he'll have issue with the idea that women are inferior, as he should. But he's also very well known for writing an article saying that women aren't funny and can't be funny. It was something that seems to fit into that category of thinking that women are inferior, at the very least in this regard. I'm glad he is objecting to it broadly, but it's very weird. This is one of the worst positions he's ever taken, is to say that women aren't funny, and gotten to a bit of a indirect conflict with Tina Fey over the whole thing.
This claim Islam seems to make it less apologetically than most. Claims that the world will come to an end in an apocalyptic form, which will lead to the victory of one religion or another, are not peaceful either. It's possible, perhaps, I haven't exhausted all my remarks, that the endless teaching of battle stories to children and the stories of lethal feuds from 7th century Arabia don't lead to peace, or the forcing of children to memorize and retell such stories.
And this is
by
what I was
rote
talking
doesn't
about,
lead to peace
being
either.
kind of
It's
frozen
arguable
in
that peace
time,
isn't attainable,
and
it's
if
false.
morality proceeds,
It may
that
be arguable in some forms
that freezing is
sometimes in
very
places that religion
dangerous.
isn't even desirable. But it will not come by the fanatical adoption of a man-made text and a man-made supreme leader. Nothing but war and tyranny has ever come from the adoption of formulae like these. The only way to moral and intellectual satisfaction, even temporary, perhaps only temporary, but of any kind at all, comes to those who are willing to take the great risk of thinking for themselves at all hazards and trying to share the benefits of that tolerance and that open-mindedness with others. And with that, for now, I'll rest my case. Thank you very much.
So, what I stopped myself from mentioning before he concluded, I wanted to talk about the approach he had to his opening statement. Clearly, clearly he had done some preparation, right? He's quoting specific people, specific events. He's reading from his notes for some amount of it, but it also is pretty clear that for some amount it is he has read the quote or the idea, and then he is ad libbing uh, at least a bit of what his analysis will be from there. This is a nice middle ground if you don't want to do a very formal, written out speech for the beginning. In different contexts, it's more or less necessary. This is fine here, but I think ultimately a little more structure would have made for a better case. Now, of course, he's not trying to make the best case, he's trying to make the most compelling case. And this is why we have things like that anecdote about the clergyman I think it was the Coptic Pope in Egypt, which can be fine. I just think I think this is an interesting middle ground as far as because we saw a couple days ago with Vosh versus Dr. Bergarden that Vosh not having we had the extremes, right? Vosh had nothing prepared, spoke off the cuff. Dr. Bergarden had a complete slideshow and everything written out opening speech, and this is something in the middle. These things are possible in the right context are preferable, but it's good to see different places along that spectrum.
12 minutes for yourself.
Thank you. First, thank you
Oh,
for this
another thing
invitation here.
before we let uh, Ramadan begin, something that I think is important to pay attention to is the position that he's in at this moment. Remember that 10 years ago, possibly even longer, there was a lot more, maybe not more, but there was a lot less pushback against open Islamophobia, especially 10 years before that, right? We're still fighting our way through that huge surge after 9/11, and that context weighs on discussions like this. You have to like I don't know very much about Ramadan specifically, so no matter what you think of him specifically, you do have to kind of feel bad a little bit about the position he's in, where these debates are often simply a guise for Islamophobia. Hitchens, if he were someone else, might have just gotten up there and talked about how like Muslims just want to kill you. And while he didn't do that, if you rewatch Hitchens' opening with the keeping in mind the like being on the lookout for Islamophobia, you'll accidentally see a lot of it, and it's not really there so much as it's there by implication because he keeps talking about these things that Islam or Muslims have done. And that is a distinction I want to keep making. I know I made it before, but there is a distinction, of course, between the religion and its adherents. And so when I say Islam, I'm talking about the religious structure, and when I talk about Muslims, I'm talking about the people. And he'll mention these things, and they're not unique to Islam, and Hitchens is perfectly aware of that, happy to admit that. In fact, he in other conversations he's practically giddy to mention it because his issue is with religion generally. However, from the position that Ramadan is in, you hear all these things, and it sounds like this is an attack on Islam, even though it's only because this is the discussion we're having now. This kind of comes up with discussions of BLM, right? Someone will say Black Lives Matter, and invariably you get the response of all lives matter. And it's like, well, yeah, we just happen to be talking about Black lives at the moment. And in this case, we happen to be talking about Islam. Were we talking about Catholicism, I'm sure Hitchens could have gone on for several hours without taking a breath before he ran out of negative things to say about Catholicism, because he's not a fan of those things, of that religion either, or indeed any religion. But when we're only talking about Islam, it does feel like it's pointed specifically at you, or specifically at your religion when that's not the intention whatsoever.
This
And so
evening, and I really
can't
also
envy
want
his
to
position.
thank once again Oxford University Press for organizing my visit here in the States, and I won't forget ACLU and others who helped me to struggle for my rights for being here in the States and being able to speak, to listen,
I don't know what this
and
context
to
is. I know
contribute to
Hitchens welcomed him back to the
the
United States. I
American
assumed he had
debate or the
traveled, but
Western
apparently
debate,
there were
and I
some
know that
issues with
among
it. I don't
us,
know what that
Jim and
context
Jeffrey
is.
is here, so I
Feel
want
free to look into it if you
thank
want.
you again for
It is
this
potentially
support.
relevant, but
Let
not.
me go straight
But the potential
to,
is not
to
great
some
enough
of
that I
the
feel the need
points,
to
and I'm not going to
investigate
respond straight away to some of
who
the,
this
the
person
claims,
is
on
to
all
detract
the
from his
claims,
points
but
before he makes them.
during my talk, as it is the introductory speech, let me highlight some of the points. When I got the question, of course, as a Muslim and as a believer, but as someone who is coming from within the realm of religions, it was quite clear that to put it that way was not the right question to ask. Is Islam a religion of peace, or is Christianity, or is Judaism?
I'll let him explain in a second. I do like this rephrasing of like maybe there's a problem with the way the question is asked. This is another reason why he should have spoken first. I assume the event organizers are the ones who decided how this goes, so I'm not blaming any of the interlocutors here. But this is again why you want the person taking the proactive position to speak first. He might need to reinterpret the prompt as he seems to be doing here, and it makes a lot of sense to do. I do remember some of what his position is. So given what he thinks, like it does make a lot of sense to rephrase things. But then you have a speech where it's a little incoherent what Hitchens is saying, given the new context that he had no access to.
Is Buddhism a religion or a spirituality of peace? Doesn't mean anything for me. It's not the right question. It's not the accurate question. Not because I think that there is a good Islam and the right Islam, and there are
Right,
people
and this is
who
where
are acting in
you see like he's even responding to like Hitchens making arguments that don't really make sense given his positions. But of course, how could he know what what Ramadan will say before he says it? Should be the other way around. I'll stop going on about it, I think, but just keep that in mind. There are probably going to be more instances of talking past each other until the end of this speech, basically. Once they get into the back and forth and they've heard from each other, we should expect more direct confrontation that, if it doesn't exist here, is understandable and kind of give a pass to.
Islam was not representing what Islam is. This is not my point. I never said that, by the way. But the point for me is really to try to deal with a phenomenon, with religion from within, and to try to understand the dynamics and to understand the trends and to understand the diversity.
And this is, of course, a very that sounds like a very fruitful thing to do, something very interesting to look into. This is why religious studies exist, and I think is a more productive discussion topic than the one we have, but not particularly conducive to a debate, which is what they're trying to do. So we'll see how much we actually get to do that. This is why a lot of times debate is not particularly good for getting to maybe not new, but getting to truth, because sometimes the format will get in the way from what could be more productive, like an in-depth study of why religions do what they do, and one in particular or other,
Just to essentialize one religion by saying it's all about war, it's all about peace.
And I'm glad Hitchens didn't say it's all about one thing or another.
Said by
but of course
George
he's
W.
responding
Bush
more to the prompt than Hitchens.
Doesn't mean anything for me. So this is one point which is important. But religions, and all the religions, and Islam among all the other religions, are dealing with human beings. And if you deal with human beings, you deal with violence and you deal with peace. You deal with violence. Because human beings, by definition, have to do with violence. They have to deal with aggressivity, with wars. And to
it's something that
from the
these
religion
things
not
pervade,
to tackle the issue is just to dream of something which is not going to happen. all the spirituality.
So far,
Go
not
for
much of an
Buddhism
argument
or
made,
go
so
for
much
the
as
Bhagavad
reframing
Gita,
and
you deal
explaining
with
why.
violence. So this is it. Now, what is the answer coming from religions and from
But of
trance
course,
when it comes to
if you're going to rephrase the prompt, which is I think completely reasonable to do, we even discussed it with the last debate we reviewed. I think you need to say what that I think you need to say what that revision is a little more quickly than this. Like, I know I'm pausing and like nitpicking and whatnot, but I think he's about to get into an argument for his position. It sounded like that's where he was getting to, and there's a little bit of uncertainty. Like, no. What is it that you are trying to say? What is your proposed thesis, or do you have one? If you don't have one, and you would prefer um, a discussion that is more studious, right? Like you want to do like religious study type discussion. Okay, but that's not what you are. That's not what we're doing here.
to violence and to peace? This is the right question for me. Do we have something which is coming and helping us to go towards peace? This is, for me, the right question. So,
I'm going to back it up. I
Christians,
want
when it,
to understand
now,
that more clearly.
what is the answer coming from religions and from trance when it comes to violence and to peace? This is the right question for me. Do we have something which is coming and helping us
Oh, okay. I
to go towards peace? This is, for me, the right question.
okay. I take back what I said about not providing a problem. I thought he was going to say when he said what is the answer. I thought he was saying the answer to a question he hasn't asked yet. I misunderstood. So that's my mistake. He's rephrasing it to instead say what is it is by implication so far, and I think hopefully he'll make it more clear. But it seems by implication he's saying the topic should be rephrased as what is Islam's response to the problem of violence, and he would, I think, take the position that it is to endeavor towards peace. And that, I think, is a reasonable reinterpretation, but we have to do a lot of discussing about whether that's accurate or not.
So now, once again, when I have people speaking from outside, and it's especially the case these days when it comes to Islam, is we speak about Islam and we speak about, something which is a religion that is perceived through one window or through one interpretation, and we very often take what is visible through the media. But Islam is as complex as Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism and Hinduism.
This is what I meant when I talked about the position he's in. This is why he's relating it to these other religions. It is important to note that that Islam is not exceptional in this way, and this feels a little bit like a defense, but of course Hitchens or like he preempted this a little bit, but even like again, this is an opening speech, so he's not necessarily going to respond, but this is kind of why this is coming up is he shouldn't have to say this. It shouldn't matter whether Islam is just like Buddhism or Christianity or whatever else. It's more important like what does Islam say in this regard specifically, even if in a vortex, even if in a vacuum we could discuss it, but there is the presumption of attack because there are especially then, and that hasn't really gone away, a lot of attacks on Islam and Muslims, and there's a bit of a defense here, even though it's not really a defense, right? If everything Hitchens said would still be true if you said and also these other religions, and he would also say that. So it doesn't really help with the argumentation, but it's not. I don't want to say it's a mistake because I understand why it's important to make a statement like that.
It's a diversity of interpretations. Yes, you are right. The Quran is for the Muslims the very word of God, but many interpretations and many ways of dealing with the books. The problem is not the book, the problem is the reader. Is the way, no, we have only 10 minutes. So, this is why when, for example,
like the problem isn't the books, the problem is the reader. Kind of hints at what Hitchens was saying before about, who is the true Muslim or not. That's not exactly what he's saying, but it's kind of what he's saying, right? It's you are reading it wrong and you should go to the text. This is simultaneously a justification of Hitchens making that argument and also the reason why he shouldn't have done it, because on the one hand he's saying the reader is the problem, not the books, and you could interpret that as to say these people are not really following the books, they're not really Muslim in that way. You could also interpret it as saying what we should be looking at is not the adherents but the texts, and it is somehow he found a way where it's like both it's both refuted and justified, and now it's very strange.
Example,
It's kind
you
of funny how
take
that
a text,
happens.
and you can do this with the Bible, with the Torah, the
Yeah, you can, and this is
Gospels.
exactly the problem,
It's
right?
always the same.
There is
Tell me
the
the way you read,
the
I will know what is
interpretation.
in your mind, but not for sure what is in the text.
But of course, religion
And
is a
this is
tool
something
that
which is the
lends
starting
itself
point of a serious
towards bad
discussion in
interpretation. It is not
theology.
possible
Because I don't
to
like all
derive in the
these
same way
intellectuals and
prescriptions
philosophers and even journalists.
through interpretation like that for other mediums. Like, maybe I, maybe I read Lord of the Rings and I derive some bad interpretation. Okay, sure, but there is no claim that this should be the law that governs the world, or whatever else. There is no claim that there's no implication towards greater power beyond my interpretation. Sometimes there are issues with that, like we see with oh, what's the name of that book? It's like the neo-Nazi Bible. It's the Turner Diaries, the book that the Oklahoma City bomber apparently read and inspired him a bit. Um, some of these books, yeah, they have like the problem of interpretation, but for the most part, there is not that assumption of greater power. People aren't. If you interpret Lord of the Rings poorly, or in a violent way, or in a bad way, or whatever else, there's no implication that that's going to guide law or countries or other great forces in the world, like organized religions and whatnot. So that danger is there, irrespective. Yeah.
They are
This is how
very
religion
keen
lends itself
on
to these
understanding the
problems.
complexity of philosophies and the simplicity of religions. That's not right. And the one to blame sometimes are the religious people themselves, because the way they present their religion is something which is all of dream and hopes and not dealing with the reality,
Some
which
of
is
these
a complex reality.
positions he's
And this is
taking, I
where
think, will make
I
more sense
think,
when he gets
we
to
have
something I know is
come
coming.
to a
So
better
I'll leave my
understanding. So
thoughts on it.
very
until
often when
then.
I deal with such topics, I just have to start with the very beginning. We want to deal with the religion, let us speak about religious issues and religious understanding, not to avoid the starting to just to come to newspapers and headlines. It's not going to help us to understand religion just to go for what is happening in the world. Let us also understand the fundamentals and then come to some of the translation, the historical experiences. Because as much as you can speak about September 11, you can speak about the 16th century under the Ottoman Empire, which was a great civilization with a diversity, Christians and Jews and
this is again
even
an
non-believers
instance of
working and living together. We are always speaking about
Argument
Andalusia.
of non,
But
the argument that Islam is not unique in this regard, which, I mean, yes, true, and I understand why he's saying it, but I I do think the debate suffers because he has to say it, and this is like a weird and very small additional harm caused by rampant bigotry, like Islamophobia, of like now we have trouble expressing good ideas because there is a need to argue against the vitriol that's not even necessarily in the room, or at the very least not on the stage.
we can prove everything with history if we don't get a sense of what are the principles we are talking about. So, for example, coming from a religious viewpoint, I wouldn't say Islam is the religion of peace. I say Islam is a religion for human beings. It deals with peace and it deals with violence. And it helps the people to go from violence towards peace. It's a way towards peace, but it's not a peaceful reality, because we are not peaceful beings. We are all in tension. Just to get that inner peace in us, and this is the starting point of the Islamic philosophy of human being, is really to start with your own self. Look at your heart.
So before he gets too much into this, I think we can derive what his rephrasing of the prompt is more clearly now, and also what his stance is on that new prompt is that Islam, like all religions, and I'm sure he would agree, many other institutions, things like governments and whatnot, deals with peace and violence. It is not exclusively interested in one or the other, but an adherence to its principles should lead to peace or bring about peace or provide an inner peace. That part is a little is not yet clarified, and I think this position is fair to reinterpret, but not so meaningfully different than the provided prompt of Islam a religion of peace that we really need to readjust what the arguments should look like. Basically, the method of answering is, instead of saying yes or no, it is to answer that Islam is a religion which brings about peace or will provide you inner peace, or adhering to, as I said, we'll clarify as we proceed. Um, and this potentially is, so I think if approached in good faith, which so far Ramadan seems to be doing, and if the things I remember about this debate lend me to believe that he is a good faith interlocutor, uh, is very reasonable, very productive, and very interesting. Interpreted poorly by a bad faith speaker, someone like, I know I'm going to keep mentioning him because he's gonna. It's just so relevant to contrast a good faith speaker as opposed to a bad faith one. But the Muslim skeptic, who we'll get to later in future debates, um, has used positions like this. He will say things like, Islam will bring about inner peace, and like adhering to its rules brings about peace, but uses that to justify authoritarianism by saying strict adherence and an adherence with in and maximal force employed in enforcing adherence will bring about a peaceful world in a way that an authoritarian will talk about peace. I don't, to be very, very clear, because I don't want to give even the slightest impression that of an accusation towards Ramadan here. It's, from what I remember and what I've seen so far, think he would vehemently disagree with that kind of position. I don't think this is what he's doing. I'm just saying that this rephrasing can be co-opted just to say, not to even that it's bad to rephrase it like this, just to say keep things like that in mind. Be aware of how of it, be aware a little bit of interpretation in what you say as well.
And tell me if you are at peace.
It's just something
or you
that
were
I
at
think
peace.
about a lot.
Peace is a process through which you have, it's a process that you get at the end of a self-education. Educate yourself to get this inner peace. This is coming from the universal message of all the religions.
And
you get
so
this
far,
in Buddhism,
his focus seems
before
to be on
even
inner
speaking,
peace,
or not
as
even
opposed
speaking
to
about one
peace
God,
in the
but
world,
you get it in Judaism,
which
you
is
get
even
it
more
in Christianity.
an indication
Educate
of
yourself to get that peace. So you have to deal with your inner wars and
non-authoritarianism.
tensions. So this is the way we have to deal with the issue about peace. And the starting point is spirituality. Why? Because at the end of the day, it's really something which is important. And this is the difference that you can find between Islam and the Greek tradition. If you come back to Socrates, Socrates was saying your body in itself is bad. And this is why you have the soul helping you to educate your body and to master your body. In Islam, there is nothing like that. Your body is not bad, is not good, and your soul is not bad, is not good. It depends on what you are going to make out of it. It's your responsibility because you are free.
I'm not sure how much this is an argument, but I do like seeing reasons that he likes the religion that are positive. The reason being is, so much of the discussion of Islam is, as I said, been surrounded by the rampant homophobia that it took off after 9/11, and there's so much discussion of there's so much discussion of the violence or why it's bad and yada yada etc. And often met with defenses or people who are worse than what people thought Islam could be like, and very little of the positive things that people like about it, because people do like things for reasons, and people don't just like Islam because they're authoritarians. There's often something like, for Ramadan here, he's expressing an appreciation for not being, for the lack of shame just for being. And I think that's a good thing. I like hearing about things like that, because religion, like many other ideologies and philosophies, has good and bad aspects inside of it. The problem, I think, with religion is that it doesn't give you, it in fact argues against having tools for discerning the good from the bad, by way of insisting that it can that everything contained within must be good. But when you look at it more, like when you take a step back, look at it critically, there are positive and negative aspects to all ideologies and religions, and I do like talking about, in some regard, what some of these positive aspects can be. I like that idea that you are not wrong just for being. I think that's something that people could stand to remember more, and especially nowadays.
It is in your freedom, and you have to use your freedom to make it bad or to make it good. Take the good decision for your body, that's good. Make the bad decision, that's bad. So it's all.
Now, hidden behind this, and this is something I because I felt like I was being, I felt a little too kind. My inner angry internet atheist was getting upset. Remember that some of the prescriptions for, like, okay, making good decisions for your body is good, and making bad decisions for your body is bad. Some of these prescriptions are absolute nonsense. The insistence, for example, and I think this is common with I think this is common with both halal and kosher meats, for example, that it be blessed by a religious person. This is nonsense. Your body doesn't become more or less harmed with or without that factor. That doesn't apply anything at all. Some of these are, if you like, as far as I know, some of these decisions are not strictly bad. Some of them could be, I guess. Like, if this applies to something like you are forced to dress a certain way, then that is a harm to freedom of expression. But a lot of these things, like a prohibition of drinking alcohol, it's not necessarily like it's better not to get drunk constantly. Obviously, alcoholism is a problem, but like, alcohol is not an evil unto itself, and having a little bit of it isn't necessarily bad. And to have that blatant restriction and to call that bad for making a bad decision in your body, I think is reductive and harmful, even in this very positive portrayal of how to interpret these guidelines and rules.
All a question of educating yourself with your own body. And it's exactly the same when it comes to the understanding of the world. So this way towards peace, it's based on education. It's based on a spiritual way of dealing with yourself. And you know what is the meaning of that? The very essence of what I'm trying to translate now is jihad. So this is something which is coming from the classical tradition. And once again, the classical tradition is helping us understand jihad is resist the bad to promote the good. And the bad is in yourself first.
Something to remember, and this is because of cultural context, it's just one of those things we have to remind ourselves of. Jihad has been often taken to mean, in places that don't speak Arabic, holy war, and I want to be thorough here about its definition and interpretation. Now, obviously, there's going to be some difficulty. Google is not an arbiter of definitional truth, and translation is an issue. But my understanding is that there are multiple definitions. A struggle or fight against enemies of Islam. This could be literally what we're doing right now with the debate. That a struggle, like having a discussion or an argument against an enemy of Islam, someone like Christopher Hitchens, who's an atheist, or an anti-theist as he described himself. That could be what we're doing now. That is very reasonable thing to do, even if you disagree with this position, which I do. Or a spiritual struggle against oneself, within oneself against sin. it is not nearly as vitriolic as it has been painted to be. However, it is very often used in that way. I don't want to pretend that it is this neutral term that is never used to imply violence. I just want to I just want to be clear that this term needs a lot, like has a lot more nuance than people give it credit for, like most terms. Um, and we shouldn't assume the worst. Try instead with terms like this, and there are a lot of words like this in every language, including ones that you speak, that are not super clear. You might have impressions of what they mean immediately, but to be one very important skill in understanding arguments and understanding each other people, even outside of an argumentative setting, just like talking with people, is identifying words like this and listening for context for use and how people mean them. I don't remember exactly because I've been blathering for too long of how he used it already, but I think it's more likely that he's using this more in spiritual inner conflict sense than I would be very surprised if in this argument where in this debate where he's taking the position that Islam is, you know, in some way a path towards peace, that he would argue for violent holy war. I don't think that's what he's about to do, if I'm being honest.
And then you will try to get the good. And to get the good is this inner peace. So jihad is not the way towards war, it's the way towards peace. Because you have, as
This
a
is
human
again a
being,
dangerous moment
intrinsically
because
to deal
that
with.
sentence, oh man, that sentence is highly dependent on context and appropriate interpretation. That doesn't. I'm not saying he shouldn't say it, right? I'm not saying uh, you should go out of your way to make sure every sentence can only be interpreted properly. You'll be speaking in uh, contractual paragraphs like legalese. But what I am saying is that this is something to pay attention to when if someone makes an argument like this, you got to pay a lot of attention to what they mean and how they're using it. And this is why it's important to identify the level of good faith that a person is approaching things in. Uh, if you know, you could say that saying everything he said word for word be justifying holy war and authoritarianism, right? To say, you know, the jihad is the road to peace, and by jihad I do mean violent conquest, so that when there are only Muslims in an authoritarian state left, that we will have peace. You know, a person could mean that, and you got to be on the you have to be very attentive with statements like those.
With your inner wars and inner tensions.
But if he's
It's
talking about
exactly the same
internal struggle,
in the world, that what we have to do, you will find something which is the will of God. What is the will of God? Diversity. He made you tribes and nations in order for you to know each other. But you know the risk of diversity? It could be lots of knowledge and potential wars.
to continue my shadow boxing here, uh, to making claims about knowing the will of God is at a minimum presumptuous, oftentimes outright arrogant. Something I have heard, I haven't checked up on this, and I don't feel like doing it now. Maybe I will in another instance. Is that I remember there was some study I had heard about where when people think about what God is saying, the parts of their brain that light up are the same as the parts of their brain that comes to their own opinions. Remember, while we are appraising the arguments, I have a position here. I do not believe that there is a God, and therefore I do not believe that Islam purports truth in any in its description of the world, and I think its morals are, as you know, it's the kind of things that you have to appraise individually, and you know there's going to be some good and some bad, and I don't know enough to know how much of either exists. I just want to say, like, just because it sounds very nice and he's doing a very good job of calming the discussion, that we're talking not about violence, and instead we're talking about inner peace. Just remember, it's built on a foundation that I think is flawed, and if you agree with me, you have to remember, like, if you agree that Islam is not true, as it were, then you just keep in mind it sounds very nice, but remember it's based on what we would consider untrue.
So you have to educate yourself to live with other and with this diversity to know each other.
And you shouldn't need religion.
So you
for
can
this.
look at Islam
you
saying,
can
you know
derive
what
that
Islam
conclusion
claims?
irrespective of the
It's
word
the
of
last
God.
and final religion. It's not enough to end with this sentence. The most important thing is what Islam is saying about the other religions. That you have to remove them from the earth? No. He made you tribes and nations in order for you to know each other.
So this is the difficulty of interpretation, right? On the one hand, to say, oh, look, it's saying it's not the only religion. Sure, it is saying there are to be no more. So at a minimum, you could argue that it is someone could reasonably interpret that to say, if there is a new religion that comes about, you have to, this is like an affront to God, and this is the kind of thing where like, well, what happens if there's a split in Islam, like Sunni and Shia? I don't know if there's anything to do with that for this conflict. Please don't interpret that as me saying there is. But additionally, it does not say that statement has nothing to do with whether there should be any violence towards previous religions. It has the reference to saying he made you tribes of peoples that you may know each other or whatever else. This is from Jewish holy texts that precede Islam, so oftentimes there's reinterpretation. It's definitely not intended to be interpreted alongside, and you could just as well say that instead you should interpret alongside the statement about being the last and final religion the prescriptions of what to do about apostasy, which my understanding is that apostates are not to be treated well, to say it, but to put it mildly.
So respect the Christians, respect the Jews, respect the people.
I like his conclusion. Yeah, respect people, but
it's a call towards
the
respect
risk,
that you find also in the text.
Like it'd be nice
so
if
yes,
everyone
you will have Muslims
who read
they
these
will
books
take one dimension and
landed on
interpret
those
this
conclusions, but
as
they
it
don't.
is the final
And
religion.
instead, it is
we are
better.
not going to deal with all the.
If I'm going to talk this long, I'll pause it. Instead, it is better to have the tools to come to these conclusions than to hope that people derive these conclusions from reading flawed ancient texts that definitely don't say it outright.
The others. But you cannot deny the fact that through history, Muslims, in many situations, in many historical situations, were dealing with this diversity, and we learned from the Middle Ages, and we learned from the Ottoman Empire that Muslims are able to deal with diversity and take from the Jewish tradition.
And by the way, this is part of why I think Hitchens' approach was good in concept, but should have been more explicit in the way I was saying. Of his issue is the danger, well, maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't put words in his mouth, but an issue is the danger of interpretation. That you don't necessarily have to interpret the texts in this positive way. And that is why it is not necessarily peaceful. It has a propensity towards violence because it is a broad prescription that is capable of being interpreted negatively.
Maimonides was speaking Arabic better than me. He was a Jew, and he was an intellectual, and he was a theologian, and he was dealing with respectful people.
An ancient
so
historian, if I remember
all
correctly.
these Muslims were wrong Muslims because they didn't understand that the final religion should not listen to the first monotheistic tradition.
I think he's getting caught
That's
up too
not
much
true.
on the.
You cannot reduce this in
We
such
gotta
a
get a
way.
move on.
It's
It's
too
been
simplistic
We've
to
been at this
represent
for
what a
an hour and a
religion
half,
is
and we're
and
30
what
minutes
a history
into
and a
an hour and a
historical
half video.
experience is.
Can't pause this much. I'm talking
So
too much.
this is for
Too many
me
words
something
on my
which has to
face.
do with the diversity that we have, that it's rooted in the Islamic tradition as well, in the classical tradition that we find it. So when you deal with diversity, know that you need to promote, and it's out of your personal education, mutual knowledge, to get respect. But you also have to deal sometimes with oppressors and people who are going to try to take over, and you have to resist. And this resistance in order to reform the world for the better is the very
Of course, the
meaning
question
of
is,
jihad.
does Islam
Now,
take
once again, I
issue
will
with
never deny
oppressors
the fact that
writ
some
large?
Muslims, some theologians
I'm not
in
so
history
sure.
and now are using some of the verses in a way which is for me unacceptable. And I go even further than that. Just after September 11, when I was invited by Time, I came here and I was asked about this. I said, you know what? It's not only not good and not Islamic, it's anti-Islamic what they are doing. It's against my religion. It's against the principles. So I'm not saying this is the good
This is the
religion and
problem
this is
of
bad.
interpretation,
I
right?
acknowledge the
It
fact
is
that they
dogma,
are
and we read
interpreting
it
the
differently.
text
So
in
who
a
is the
way.
real one
But what
and
I'm
who's
saying
doing the
from
right
where
thing?
I am, from
Maybe
within
the
my tradition,
problem
is this
the
is
dogma in the first
anti-Islamic.
place.
This is not the right
That
way
there is a
to deal with
text
the
that
text.
is supposed
So
to
you
have this
cannot
much power over
reduce
people's
this
lives, and it is
into something which
this
is, oh, the only right
open
Muslims are the Muslims who
to
are acting
violent
the way I
interpretation.
believe Islam is, meaning bad. I think it's not fair. It's not a discussion that we can have. So let me come to my conclusion here. At the end of the day, if you go through the text and you understand the philosophy of this,
A good example of what I'm talking about, of the danger of interpretation in a context that is outside of this highly charged one, as far as like I said, the Islamophobia I keep talking about, is my understanding. There's a Christian apologist by the name of Dr. William Lane Craig, and it's my understanding that he is on record as saying. And when I say it's my understanding, I just don't remember where that clip is. Like I've like heard him say it, but basically that there's a passage in the Old Testament that wherein God demands the genocide of a group of people, and Craig, who is, as far as I'm aware, a respected Christian apologist. This is not some random dude on the street. This is someone who educates people and who's a respected thinker in this field. Has said, like, if there were any more Amalekites around, I believe that was the group, he would think that commandment still stands, and he would be duty bound to genocide them. And this is the kind of thing. Like, we can't get away from that. Any pernicious element, or even possibly pernicious element, can be very easily a source of immense harm. Like, there aren't any of these people around that we know of. But maybe do some DNA tests and like, oh, there are still some people with Amalekite DNA. I don't think Craig is going to go out murdering people, but the fact that he thinks he at least said he thinks he should, is a problem in itself, and maybe other people agree, and it's potential for a lot of violence right there.
way towards peace, dealing with your own wars and inner tensions and the tensions within the society. You will find interpretations within Islam that are promoting something which has to do with peace without avoiding violence, because we all have to deal with our violence. This is something which is important, and in history you will find the examples for this and for that. So don't rely on history. With history you prove whatever you want. But
That's a
at the
good
end
point.
of the
Yeah,
day,
we can't point to history, but this is again
exactly the case
a
for
result
all the
of
philosophies. All the
journalist
people who are
type of
promoting
arguments of
human
talking about
rights,
history, talking
we
about
all have to do
anecdote,
something which is out of
and
humility
only have
to
a strong
check
point
our people.
by implication.
Because with the best means, you can promote the bad or the worst attitude. In
Sure,
the name
but
of
this isn't a
human rights,
justification for
we want to kill people.
for
In the name of human rights, we
defending
can
something like
promote and
something
support
that has
the
a
war in
lot of
Iraq and
negative
Afghanistan,
aspects to it,
where
you know.
so many innocent people have been killed. And I said it from the very beginning, never forget that the blood of an Afghani or Iraqi innocent man or woman is as valuable as the blood of an American innocent man and woman. No discussion about this. So the best ideology in the name of human rights, in the name of democracy, could be used by people to promote the worst. So let us be humble. Instead of criticizing one religion
this is
and
again
one
like a
ideology,
response
to know that in our
to the
universal
sense
reference,
of
you will find
persecution
people
of
using
Islamophobia,
our texts,
which is
our
understandable,
values,
but not
sometimes
but
for the
only a
good
specter here and not
sometimes for the
present.
bad. Sometimes
It
for
just
peace,
weighs
and
heavily on this
sometimes for war,
conversation.
sometimes for
It
dignity,
really sucks.
and sometimes for money. sometimes for protecting freedom and sometimes for geostrategic interests. It's not right to essentialize by saying, oh, all the wars on human rights, for human rights, or all these philosophies are right or wrong, or promoting a philosophy or a religion of violence. I think that these kind of conclusions are very dangerous because they don't give us the opportunity to find in any single religion, in any single philosophy, people of goodwill. These are the people who can talk to each other, understand each other, and make it possible to live in diversity and in mutual respect. Thank you.
Okay, so he doesn't talk about it yet here. I think this is another good middle ground type type speech where a lot of it was prepared, but he clearly isn't just reading from a script. It feels a lot more conversational. I think he did a really good job of bringing how do I put it? I feel like he did a good job of making this a calm conversation, which is really important with, as I say, the specter of Islamophobia hanging over this. And he didn't get to what I was talking about before. I don't know much about Ramadan, as I've mentioned already, but the position he'll end up getting to and provides a lot of context for his opening. At least in this debate, it seems that he is a proponent of reformation in Islam. That a lot of people have thought, well, other religions have had great reformations. Christianity and Judaism both have, I think, several for both of those. I'm sure other religions have as well. I don't know too much of the specifics about this, so I don't want to get too far into it. But he does later, if I remember correctly, propose that like maybe that's what we need to do with Islam. Maybe that is a potential solution to some of the problems that are being faced right now. And that does provide a lot of context of what he's saying, is that it's not that they're wrong. It's not that they're not Muslim so much as we need to undergo a pretty significant reformation of how Islam is going to exist in the world going forward. And I think that I'll put that in a vague way like that, so I don't put too many words in his mouth, and we can see what he says about it going forward. There are people on both sides of this issue, obviously, and I don't know too much about this movement, but it does put into a lot of context what he was talking about. And so we can move on from here to the more discussion-oriented section. Oh no, we're not getting to a discussion. Maybe it's just rebuttal.
I also don't think that the motion, if that's what it is, chosen for this evening, is a particularly good one. But I knew about it as long as Professor Ramadan did, and I did at least agree to speak to it.
I don't love that
because of that reservation.
Because Ramadan did speak to it, he simply wanted to clarify, and this is why he should have spoken for. Like,
I make this not just as a point of self-pity, but because, for example, someone in this great city who's become used to making nice these days, Imam Rauf, who describes himself as both founder and visionary of whatever the downtown establishment is now to be called, wrote an article, I'm pretty sure it was on the eve of Yom Kippur, for the New York Times, in which he said, when you think about it, this is one of the most hand-washing statements.
Anyone in the future who's unaware, Yom Kippur is the Jewish Day of Atonement. It's one of the high holidays.
Yet heard him make in the Make Nice department. When you think about it, our word, Islam, is almost exact translation of your word, shalom. I didn't say it. I've never heard anyone else say it. It isn't true, among other things. Islam may have some relationship to the word salam, which can have some relationship to the word prostration or religious observance. It may. But we know what Islam means, is intended to mean, and does mean, is surrender to God. Acceptance of God's surrender, sometimes translated as submission, but in any case, the resignation to the divine will. Again, not in my opinion
This is
a
often
prescription for peace, but that
the most important
isn't my only objection to it.
for
I don't
Hitchens
think
when
that
it comes to
abjection or
discussing
fatalism or
religion.
the prostration before
And I don't
the
think you
divine,
can
or let alone before.
properly interpret what he's talking about without understanding that. And and I think it would have been important for the people arguing with him or debating with him to understand that this is so important for him and how important it is for him. I'm not sure that Ramadan doesn't. I'm just saying that it's like it comes up so much. The more of these debates you've watched, and I've watched a bunch of Hitchens debates, it's very clear that this is the first thing on his mind, even before the question of whether it's true. And that well, maybe not that far, but like at least from my interpretation, that's what it seems to be. And understanding that it's very important.
For holy men who are interpreting the book is a recipe for good health of any kind, mental or physical, since we're talking about the Greek concept of the body and of the spirit and of virtue. Just to get that out of the way. Now, you're right. I was surprised to find myself saying, Professor, when you say that the problem is not the book but the reader. In the case of the Quran, that is certainly true of me. It's true probably of every book I've ever read, that there are difficulties I have with it or capacities I don't have with which to approach it, to understand it. But if I'm reading the Quran, I certainly say, well, I can't tell whether this book is the Word of God or not. I can only doubt that there is such thing. But I can hope that this was a bad day for God. Can't I? And I can hope to live in a country where I can say that and get applause.
Again, freedom of expression, freedom of thought, anti-authoritarianism. It comes up constantly.
Yes, and even mirth. And don't think that it isn't a precious thing, and don't think it's being compromised. I'm coming to that. I don't like the idea of a paradise reward for martyrs. Don't like it. It's not me somehow. Don't like the account. Don't like the early accounts of village squabbles with the local Jews who've taken a look at the new claimant to be the Messiah and decided about him what they decided about the previous claimant.
This is the kind of thing where I think, while Hitchens was a very persuasive speaker, he was not necessarily the best argumentarian. And the reason I say that is this is very much not an argument, right? I don't like it. There are some of the stuff you can like, maybe you can understand why he doesn't like it and it goes without saying, but now you're making the argument and not him. Persuasive, but it's not actually speaking to any point, let alone the point of the debate.
He's no good. He's not up to snuff. Do you think the Jews are ever going to be forgiven for that, by the way? For rejecting 2 in a row? I don't think so. And I don't see why they should hope for. I don't see why they should hope for forgiveness either. And still I'm allowed to stand here and say this. And there are many parts of Europe I couldn't do that anymore. Or I'd have to be very careful in who I'd invited for the audience. I couldn't do it easily on the air.
This is, again,
couldn't
just
do it easily in
completely
print.
off topic.
Couldn't do it easily in public.
Except possibly by implication
campuses.
that, like, because
couldn't
of
do
Islam,
it with
which
certain
isn't
publishing
the case.
houses. Now, all of this has been done to
I don't think
us
he
by the
believes.
wrong Muslims. Well, let's get together then, isolate who these wrong Muslims are.
Now he's responding to no one, right? Ramadan was very clear. He doesn't mean wrong. He was very clear that he doesn't believe they're like wrong Muslims or what it were. That said, a lot of his arguments were very clearly implied that that is a concept that for which he holds water. Like, there's a concept that makes sense in the arguments he presented. But this is where we're more putting on a show than arguing with each other. We're not actually. He ought to, if he were making good arguments, make clear this apparent contradiction and or address the position as stated, which you might think is indistinguishable, right? Because Ramadan was saying, like, it's people. There's not a problem with the text. People are reading it wrong, but they're not wrong Muslims. It's like, well, okay, but you said the same. Like, it's basically the same thing, right? For all intents and purposes, there's no functional difference in the discussion, except maybe for ostracization and the lack thereof. I don't know. It's just kind of weak as in on the level of argumentation, which I was pretty sure we were going to get. Happens a lot with Hitchens, unfortunately, but we'll proceed.
Violence-backed
If I
censorship
feel this
upon
stops being
us.
fruitful, we'll stop.
And let's get rid of
We don't
them
have to get through all of this,
and have an honest discussion about the text and
especially
the
for
reader.
how long we're taking. We're 2 hours in. 2 hours in, about 40 minutes.
And I think the ball is in your court, Professor, on that. Just to stay with my own profession, the thing I know best. Not one major media outlet, print or broadcast, has yet shown you what the Danish cartoons actually look like.
This is in reference for anyone
Yale
who doesn't
University
remember.
Press,
There was an
which commissioned
instance
a
of
book
a
on them,
Danish
which was to
cartoon
include
publishing or a Danish press publishing a cartoon that included. I haven't seen it. I don't know how accessible it is, but printing a cartoon that included Muhammad in it, and there was a significant uproar, and the extent to which I don't want to get into either. Feel free to look into that if you were so interested.
the cartoons, as how could it not, eventually panicked. Yale University Press.
This, by the way, actually, this is something I really want to talk about. This is something I find very interesting. As I have been told it, again, I'm not an expert. If this is incorrect, I'm happy to be corrected. But as I understand it, the prescription against making a likeness of the Prophet Muhammad was based on the concept. It was based on the idea that he didn't want to be deified, didn't want to risk being worshipped alongside Allah, because he is a prophet and only Allah is to be worshipped. That is my understanding, is the reason behind it. And it feels, from hearing that, very humble and very respectable to say this, especially in a context where, if you look at Christianity, Jesus is worshipped alongside God, often to the exclusion of. People will sometimes say they're the same, but the point is that there are people will worship both God the Father and Jesus in Christianity. And to say, hey, don't do that with me, I kind of like. It's a nice idea. But we have seen that the prohibition of this act can be interpreted poorly, or maybe even interpreted correctly. I don't know what all it says. I've only heard this is the reason. I don't even know if that's actually the case, let alone if there are any penalties associated, or what else there is to say in the religious texts about the practice. And there's been a huge amount of, if not violence, threats of violence based on this prescription, this seemingly very humble and respectable request or demand or law or whatever else. And this is exactly this danger. Now, while I think that's a good point, I like that avenue of approach. That's not actually the argument presented. It is merely to gesture at the threats of violence, and if there was any violence, the violence that existed, and to gesture at that and say Islam, where I think that is where it looks a lot more like Islamophobia, or maybe I'm not super comfortable with that going that far, but at the very least blaming the religion for its adherence, which I think can be valid, but it is a well-worn road, and people have grown accustomed to rejecting it or knowing how to prompt rejection.
And published the book without the cartoons over the objections of its author. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. The President of the United States and the head of the Joint Chiefs a few days ago were so pulverized with fear that they had to address personally, in pleading tones, a Christian nutbag in Florida who might have been or might not have been about to commit a minor act of blasphemy. Is this the culture that is...
Oh, he doesn't talk about it. If I remember correctly, that story was one in which this person in Florida, I think he's a pastor, was saying he was going to burn a copy of the Quran. And obviously that there was a lot of discussion about this, to the point where Hitchens can merely gesture at it without feeling the need to discuss it further. I don't know if he actually did it. By implication, it sounds like he didn't actually burn a copy, but that this would be so terrible is the thing that Hitchens is taking issue with, right? And this is the exact thing. This comes up in the U.S. a lot, right? Burning the flag is the American flag is legal. It is protected by the First Amendment. It's a little overdone at this point, but it's legal, and that you have that right is supposed to be one of the great freedoms of the country. But of course, there are a lot of people who don't like that. If I remember correctly, President Trump, while in office, or maybe on the campaign trail, at some point, definitely during his, um, since becoming becoming a political player, said that he wanted to make it illegal. And this is the kind of thing that this freedom of expression and freedom to do what doesn't harm someone, it doesn't harm anyone, should be good. And yeah, it can be insulting, but you don't have a right to not be insulted.
Islam wants us to have in relation to it one of, if you like, preemptive submission.
I do want to clarify that because that sounds kind of harsh. And well, not that it sounds harsh, but it sounds too much like the fedora tippers talking about this kind of thing. Just that the the right to not be the right to not be insulted tramples too much on the right of free expression, and we have to make trade-offs and compromises, and that just the harm to freedom of expression is so great, and the benefit of not being insulted is so small that it is, at least to my mind, um, trivial to say that you should not that the right to free expression should be given credence over the right to not be offended or to not be
Preemptive
insulted.
cowering, backed by the fear of force, because that is not multiculturalism. That's nothing like the gorgeous mosaic. That's actually the absolute negation of what a multicultural system would be like. And a multicultural system
only
has
40
to look
minutes
rather
in, and I
askance, I
skipped
think,
a
on a
bunch.
religion whose preachers and websites openly
We're having fun
make
here, right?
threats against people like myself, against the Jewish people, against the Hindus, who, for heaven's sake, aren't even monotheists, can be killed on almost any pretext, against, and a very important point, and I have to make it, and against the wrong kind of Muslim. Now, Professor,
This is gesturing at a lot of
don't-
religious conflicts that I'm sure most people are familiar with, but to be clear, in particular, I know in India there's a lot of conflict between Muslims and Hindus, violent conflict, and then of course the conflicts between Sunni and Shia Muslims in mostly in the Middle East, and that also is very, very violent,
I'll say this as mildly
or
as
can
I,
be
as
and
I
has
can.
been.
Don't, you may not be aware that you were, and I'm certainly, I don't want to increase the area of unexpected offense taking that's been so hugely broadened by the sensitivities of a religion that has the answer to everything. But I'll just say I don't greatly care to be told, as if I didn't know, that an Iraqi life is as precious as an American one.
I understand where he's coming from. It feels insulting, but it is. I get why it was said in the first place. Yeah, like very often with foreign affairs, people it doesn't make much news that, or at least it didn't for quite a while, that so many Iraqi people had died in the invasion in the war in Iraq. But six American soldiers die and it makes the evening news. It is at the very least by implication a statement that American lives matter more, and I understand why it feels important to say. To say it to Hitchens is to imply that he agrees with that when he hasn't done that thing at all. That's not what we're talking about. This is kind of an issue with this style of debate, this kind of like auditorium, and like I don't know how to describe this kind of debate. It's like this long form debate where it's like semi-academic but not really, and mostly for show but not explicitly so in the way that online debates are. It's this if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. It's like this kind of debate in this kind of auditorium setting often has a lot of these like flourishes towards things that aren't relevant, and we're talking to each other, but past each other and actually to the audience, and it leads to stuff like this. It's kind of unfortunate. It also feels a
And
little
as
like he's
someone
saying
who's visited Iraq
all
quite a
lives
lot,
matter, but that's not what he's saying.
had the occasion to think about it a good deal. I wonder if you could mention anything the United States has done in Iraq that is remotely as criminal, as sadistic, and as violent as the blowing up of the Mosque of the Golden Dome in Samarra.
I mean, I don't know much about what happened
One of
there,
the
but if
holiest
it's
sites
literally
in the Muslim
blowing
world,
up a building is
callously blown up
significantly
by
less
Sunni
bad
forces in
than
alliance
killing a
with
million
forces
Iraqis,
who,
which is my understanding
perhaps
of
I'd
the
agree
current
with them
count.
for once on this, were fascistic
is
Baathists.
Like,
Probably they got the weapons. And
conflicting
that makes it
anecdotes
worse,
are
surely.
not good debate, and that's what's
Intending
happening.
to start and successfully, in fact, initiating a civil war in which countless thousands of people have been killed, religious processions have been fired upon, funerals have been fired upon, Qurans
right,
without
that's not
number,
great,
of course,
obviously.
been incinerated. Much more importantly, children, old people, and civilians. Now, where is? I just wonder. You must be able to quote it to me. Where is the Sunni fatwa against this conduct? Where is it? Where is the authoritative statement of moral
And this is
outrage?
an instance of, another. This is implication on the other side, right? If there are fatwa, let me look up that word as well. Make sure I use it correctly. Okay, a ruling court on Islam law given by a recognized authority. If there is no condemnation in an official sense against this kind of violence, is not the implication that it is condoned, right? It is this concept of if you're shouldn't you say something about it? I don't want. Unfortunately, a term that is used in debate is used elsewise in a really bad way. So I'm going to put this in context. In debate, oftentimes the concept is silence is consent. This does not apply anywhere else, but in that context of like, well, if you're quiet about it, doesn't that mean and you have this tool of condemnation? Doesn't that mean you don't condemn it? You don't have a problem with it, and not you specifically to Tariq Ramadan, but towards the organized religion in its totality. Also, something that Hitchens might have on his mind is that there was a fatwa against Salman Rushdie, a fatwa to kill him from, I believe, I don't remember who, and I don't want to look up into it. We're already digressing enough because of a book that Rushdie had written, and this is another thing he keeps on his mind. Is like there is a lot of power here because there were many attempts on Rushdie's life, and that there is power here, and it wasn't used against this violence. It doesn't speak well towards the interest in peace. I'm just gonna leave that tab open. I can keep
In the
going
Sunni
to it.
world saying this is not acceptable behavior for followers of the Prophet. I missed it. And so apparently did the followers of the Prophet miss it, because they keep on doing this all the time. They were doing it before the United States got to Iraq, and they'll be doing it after we've gone.
You can even interpret
I'm
this
sorry,
as an
I
argument
won't be
against
talked to
power, right? Because
in
the
that
power
tone
could be used for
of
good.
voice.
Like this power of fatwa could be used
And I
to
want to know, I
prevent
repeat my
violence,
question.
perhaps.
Who
I
has
don't know
the
how much it
authority
would
to
listen
issue
to,
fatwas?
but maybe it could be used to prevent violence, and it's
Is it
not.
Sheikh
And the problem is
who
that,
sometimes very much
but it can be used to.
express
It is
respect for
sometimes
who
used to
on
do harm, and the
Al
problem
Jazeera
is
gives advice
the
on all
power
kinds
that
of
exists
things.
there, right?
Some of them innocuous, sexual matters and so forth, doctrinal rulings, sometimes upon the legitimacy or otherwise of suicide bombing, if directed at Israelis. Not just Jews, of course, but no, we draw the distinction. On the other hand, Hamas, which does the suicide bombing, doesn't draw the distinction. If I can't issue a fatwa against Hamas, if I'm a Muslim, if there's no one who will and they won't, surely someone could say, we don't think Hamas should have on its website and manifesto the reproduction of the protocols of the elders of Zion. A Christian fascist fabrication that is one of the warrants for the Nazi exterminationist solution. I mean, surely that's a question for the UN Anti-Racism Committee on a spare day.
less an argument and more
Or since
discussing
that
the
spare
issues
day
with
never
the
seems to
religion,
come, for some Muslim authority to say, no, brothers, don't do that. It doesn't come. It doesn't happen. Look on the website, it's still there. Now, you would do
And
better,
this
I
argument
think, Professor,
can
if you
be
identified
okay,
yourself
right?
as a
Like
member
if
of a very
extrapolated
small...
correctly, you can say that Islam at a minimum is failing in the avenue of promoting peace, and you could, and like, does that mean it's not a religion of peace? I guess in a way, right? That it is at the very least not currently a religion of peace. I think that's a reasonable argument. Of course, he doesn't follow through, right? It's implication and left to extrapolation. Um, to which you might say, then that's why we need a reform. But like, okay, then it can be a religion of peace, but it is not now. Or if asked, like, well, is it conservative? But then it's this problem of it's kind of a problem of essentialism, right? That even to say there is an essential essence of what Islam is, I don't know that there necessarily is one, and trying to derive it is a problem. But to say there are clearly dangerous aspects, ways in which it is at a minimum failing, ways in which it is being used for harm is relevant. And I don't know in that context how you could make the position that Ramadan is supposed to. And that's why I disagree, right?
and critical and endangered minority. Someone who really is against all this.
I apologize if the energy's a little down.
And will say so, and will also
getting a little worn
decry
out
the
after
fact
2
that
hours.
the religion itself can't seem to throw it off. But you seem to have that a little bit both ways. Now,
I'm going to have to
very well.
stop you so we can get
Yes, so then my closing statement is this. If you want diversity, as much as the professor does, as much as I'm sure many people here do, religious diversity, cultural diversity, what you need for it is this. You need a secular state with a godless constitution like this one.
I like that he has a prescription. Well, I guess I don't. It's not really relevant to the debate. It's not relevant to the debate as presented, because as of yet, Ramadan has not made an argument for a theocracy of any kind, let alone an Islamic one, let alone that Islamic law should have any sort of influence on governmental law. There are people who will do this, and maybe he's speaking towards the people who might think that there should be. But I also know that this is something that he values in a conversation about religion, understands that there's an undercurrent of wanting theocracy sometimes, and wants to speak against this. But I agree, yeah. Secular, or I don't remember how he put it, a secular government with a godless constitution. Yeah. Freedom of religion has tended to only come in circumstances of secularism.
To speak
I won't say that.
did
That might
of
not
the
be
Ottoman
true.
Empire as a place
that
where
back.
there were not just Muslims, but Christians and Jews, is either not to know yourself or to expect others to have forgotten or not to know what it meant to be a non-Muslim under the Caliphate or under any similar theocratic Muslim authority to this day. No, what we need, secularism is the only guarantee of religious freedom, and yours and that of every other Muslim we will defend. But you won't be surprised that we have some questions for you in the meanwhile. Thank you.
I find that conclusion to be strange and suspect. It feels like it carries some of the venom of Islamophobia, but
Okay.
I do like the clarity of religious freedom is something we care about as well, and we, meaning atheists and secularists, that religious freedom is important, and the way to get it is by the freedom to be any religion you want or not, and that's a right that should be protected. But to protect it means to prevent the domination that any religion might want to have over culture or law or whatever else.
Uh, you laughed a lot, make laugh the people. And I have a problem with, we are talking about people who are being killed, are talking about people
This is
about
kind of a
wars.
performativity position.
That's
I mean,
fine. I have a problem with the way you are putting things here. First, when you said the first remark, say, okay, you know what? These are the first letters of totalitarianism.
he says this all the
Because
time.
Islam
and
is a
it's such a bad
comprehensive religion,
argument.
by the way, exactly like Judaism and Christianity. I never met a rabbi, a Christian,
To distinguish
telling
Islam
me
from
you are
other
with God on
religions is not
Saturday
relevant
and with
still,
the devil on
but,
Monday, or what is
I
that?
get why he feels he has to say
But in
it. Less so
Islam,
here,
it's
but-
as if it's all together. It's a very simplistic way of dealing with Islam. It's a comprehensive religion, but there are rights of God and rights of people, and you have to differentiate. And it's very old. Come back to Alain de Libera, the French philosopher, telling you, you know what, separating authority between what is to God and what is to human being, it's coming from Islam. And this was taught and
Well,
translated
not
into
right. Like, that's just
Christianity in
not
the Middle
true.
Ages, exactly the opposite of what we think.
Well, I mean, that's just not true, right? Like, the New Testament has prescriptions that say something of the same thing, right? The very famous line, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, render unto God that which is God's. This is my understanding. That's in the New Testament. Well, easily, hundreds and hundreds of years, I think it's 1500 years or so before Islam, so no. But
You may
that's not really
disagree, but
relevant, even
at
if that were
least
true.
acknowledge the fact that there are many interpretations
I mean,
in
maybe I don't know
history
enough
that
about
say
this, but
Islam is this total mean
seems weird.
totalitarian. What's that? These are the first letters of autocratic.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, the total leading to it's such a stupid
not
way
an
of making
argument.
the argument. I
It's
don't
not
understand how he
serious.
ever made that argument.
And as I said,
He
yes,
just- he would make it all the time.
We are talking about reading. And by the way, it's for all the texts. It's the same for the Marxists. You know quite well about the Marxist tradition. And you know what some Marxists did with the text? It means that everything that Marx wrote was bad? No. Once again,
However,
it's a serious...
So that's a good point, right? Like, not everything in the book is good. Not everything in the book is bad. I'm not sure if he agrees with the first part. A lot of religious people tend not to. But there is a difference between something like Marxism, which is not the word of God. It is thoughts written down by someone who had opinions and ideas who he changed and modified throughout his life and should be modified and revised and reconsidered, as opposed to the word of God written down and codified as this is the truth and the law and never to change. These are not the same things, right? If I'm not mistaken, there are aspects of what we now call Marxism that changed during Marx's life because he changed his mind on things. He learned and changed his mind and realized that he had made mistakes. These things can change. Religion, not that religion can't change, but it is built on being unchanging.
matter here. When we are talking about interpretations, I mean it. I mean that, yes, there are people using the text in a way which is not, and you have historically to acknowledge the fact that you yourself might have read some of the text not in the good way. So this is the second point about...
Oh, and that's something that's really worth mentioning. He's pointing out, like, even Hitchens admitted that he read some of the text not in a good way. Well, how do we know what a good way is? For real, like, that's a real question. How do we know? I would argue that the way we know is through philosophy and ethics and intellectual understanding, critical thinking, these avenues. Religions purport to know what's good by what's in the book. Or what is dogma, depending on the religion, right? So, like Catholics, the word of the Pope is divinely inspired word of God's messenger on earth kind of thing. So those are infallible as well, even if they're not in the book. Those interpretations can change things. But you don't have. How do you tell with only the tools, if the only tool you'll have for determining good and bad is the Quran or all the holy texts of Islam, how do you tell whose interpretation is the good one? You don't really have a way, right? You can justify with more these passages or others, but maybe you're reading it differently. The way we can tell is with non-religious thinking, and this is how religion can be dangerous. And I'm glad we got to this point. I feel that this I feel that this is very, very important. I think it's something we need to. I think it's important to pay attention to. So I hope people come back and watch this and derive value from it as well.
Now, the cartoons and some of the things that you were referring to. You know, look at the Muslim majority countries and look at the Muslims and the Western Muslims. And if you look at the reaction of the Muslims living in the States or living in Europe, you cannot just say Islam was one that all the Muslims are reacting the same way. By the way, the very month of October when the whole story started, I was in Copenhagen and I said to the Muslims, take a critical distance and don't be involved in this. You don't like it, but let it be, because this is freedom. The point is that you are not making because you are reducing something which is, oh, the cartoon was all about freedom of expression. You don't speak about the instrumentalization by politicians and governments in Muslim majority countries and even in the West about the whole story. Because this is to counter-express. I was in Copenhagen and I said to the Muslims, take a critical distance and don't be involved in this. You don't like it, but let it be, because this is freedom. The point is that you are not making because you are reducing something which is, oh, the cartoon was all about freedom of expression. You don't speak about the instrumentalization by politicians and governments in Muslim majority countries and even in the West about the whole story, because this is too complex to be put in. So many authorities, many scholars, and then you come with...
I'm not sure I understood that. I think what he's saying is he's pointing out that there was more to it than merely someone deciding to express themselves by making this cartoon. That there was this political interest from people, from all the people he mentioned, and you don't point that out. But I don't see. I guess. Okay, so then what's the relevance of that, right? Like, why would it matter? The reason it would matter is that perhaps a lot of the anger was not in response to the act so much as the political will behind the act, right? If this is done because of an Islamophobic value set and Islamophobic pressures, then that is something to be upset in and of itself, which I don't know enough about the situation to know like how accurate that is, and so I'm not really sure, but that is very interesting. I think it would be worth mentioning, but I think we are ignoring that it is definitely the case that a lot of the anger, or at the very least some amount of the anger, was coming merely from the act and not the politics behind it. And a lot of the anger was the violation of it was coming from the violation of the prohibition of making a likeness of Muhammad. So this we're like, and this is where like both are being like kind of dishonest and not making great arguments, and this is just something we're going to have to deal with and keep dealing with.
Who are the Muslims who are able to speak? If you read some of the things that I'm doing or writing, you would say that, yes, I acknowledge the fact that there is a crisis of authority in Islam. But please, don't tell me today that you didn't hear the Muslim voices around the world criticizing and saying this is unacceptable to kill the people in the streets in New York, and the condemnation was
This is a relevant thing.
Wide.
This happens all the time of like, oh, why don't Muslims condemn this? And then like, well, like there are people who do, absolutely, and it's just not talked about. I think this is the relevant distinction between what he's saying is that there are there are people with positions of authority. There's not an Islamic pope, right? It's not one church, one one authority, but but the larger authorities that do exist don't do what they have done, like with a fatwa, like Hitchens was saying, uh, in response to acts of violence like this, when they do for things like Salman Rushdie writing a book. So I think this is, again, this we're just like descending into a lot of like current events and like talking past each other in dishonesty. We'll see how much more of this I can really handle before I don't find this fruitful
Right.
anymore. We
By
are
the
approaching
scholars.
that.
If
I
you
at the
don't
very
hear,
least
of
want to
course,
hear out the
there's,
remainder of the speech.
not less than 12 councils of Muslim scholars around the world, from Amman to Istanbul to Paris,
12
Dublin,
councils
were
of
condemning
Muslim
this. It's as if
scholars
they don't speak. Because at the
don't have
end,
the
when the
same kind of
people are
authority of
calling
these
to
high-
kill
these
for
high-ranking
killing, they are
clergy, right?
heard. But when people are condemning what is done in the name of the
But we
religion,
do
it's as if they don't
under-discuss
speak.
that.
It doesn't make the headlines. But I'm telling you that
Oh,
some scholars
I know what's
did
coming.
it and
I
said
remember
it.
now. Something that's forthcoming and is coloring a lot of what he's talking about now is his own personal experience with the situation. He'll explain it in a minute, but just keep in mind, like, that he's really riled up right now, and that this feels like such an important aspect of the conversation when ultimately it was a bad argument being responded to badly. Uh, it's because it, like, might be because it's personal for him, and he'll get to it.
And I was one of them. And you know what is very interesting in the whole discussion? That when the people like what I'm saying, say, you know what he's saying is good, but he's alone.
Yeah, here is exactly what he's saying.
Minority. It's open, but he's alone. But when the people don't like what I say, you know why? He has huge followers. So depending on if you like or not what is said, you have followers or not.
This is what
So
I
I can
meant
tell
about it
you
being
something,
personal
that the
for him, and I
mainstream
understand,
Muslim
but,
presence
like,
in the West, in many Muslim majority countries
we're
as
not
well,
making arguments anymore, right?
acknowledge the
No, we're
fact
just
that they are critical
talking.
towards the use of the religion. Now, many Muslims, yes, would support, and I did this, and by the way, I was banned from this country mainly for that, are saying, for example, that the Palestinian resistance is legitimate.
If I remember correctly,
I
this
said
is
that,
like
and
some
I
of the
repeat this
controversial
here.
stuff that he was involved with, but
But
I
I
don't actually
also
know the
said
details.
that the means used to kill innocent civilians and innocent Jews in an Israeli in Israel, I cannot accept that. Have you heard that? I said it. So, and I am not alone. I'm not alone. So once again, it's many interpretations. Listen to this and also be respectful of this diversity and the way the Muslims are dealing with this. So the fatwa, the legal opinions, are coming from everywhere when you speak about some of the issues, because you know it's sensitive, so you put it in a very simplistic way. Women, violence, Hamas, and all this together.
Well, yeah,
gives
it
the
is very
impression, oh
simplistic,
yes,
because
yes,
that's
this
what
is right.
this kind
But
of
you
format
don't give the
is
people
made
all
for,
the
and it
interpretation,
sucks,
everything
and it
which
is a
done in
bad argument.
every
But we're
one
also
of
not
these
getting that
fields coming from the Islamic
nuance from the
tradition
other
and
side.
scholars of
and
today, trying to improve
mean,
the status of women.
if what you want is a
trying
religious
to
studies discussion, like,
to
this isn't the place for it.
condemn violence and
I'm
to
sorry.
promote justice and peace. You also have to deal with this. At the end, you may have a problem with religion much more than with Islam.
I love this. This is the part I thought of when I
And
thought of this debate.
to tell me,
Is that because Hitchens off
to
screen
tell
is like
me
making a gesture.
at
He's
the
like,
end
yeah,
of
well,
your speech, the only right solution is a secular, godless constitution. In the United States of America, I think it's problematic. Because I don't think it's a godless nation here. There is a reference. So, no.
Only the Constitution.
No, only the Constitution.
I
But
think
I
they
don't
both have a
think that-
point here, right? Like, he's saying, like, unfortunately, cultural Christianity pervades American society to the point where a lot of people confuse the fact that most people are Christian with this being a Christian nation. It's not. The country ostensibly is one that is secular and allows for freedom of religion. You can be any religion you want and live here and have full rights, is the idea. It's my understanding it's generally been upheld, but not always. And so, like, I understand where Hitchens saying is like, no, well, it is a godless constitution, and that's what he said is important. But Ramadan has a point as well that 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 does not seem to prevent the domination of Christianity in some regards. For example, every president this country has ever had has been ostensibly Christian. Maybe they don't actually believe or whatever, but they have to say they do. They have to at least attend church sometimes. There was a huge, huge controversy when JFK was running because he was a Catholic and not a Christian, or at the very least not a, like, to me those feel like the same word, but like, not a Protestant. It would been He was the first Catholic president, and that felt like a big deal. And when you bear that in mind, you see that, well, maybe it's not as godless as it was supposed to be, this country, and maybe we have more work to do in that regard. Now, there are different ways of approaching this. Hitchens likely would say that we need to do a more thorough job of ousting religion from being a political force, which I would agree with. You can also say, as Ramadan seemed to imply, therefore, is it that important if this is what we have and we don't really have it? It's like, well, no, this is a little, it feels a little bit whataboutism. Like, well, you don't even have it here, so what's the problem? I don't know that that's necessarily what he's saying. He's not super clear about it, and it's hard for me to see for sure what he means. But yeah, I don't know. And again, all of this is off topic. Yeah, I don't know. It's
Even the
now we're just talking
politician,
about like
even
Islam.
president of the
Like
United.
at this point, the topic is Islam? Question mark. Like for all we're talking about at this point, and this is how like debates can devolve, even in a setting where it looks like they're really not. Like online, you'll see like it'll devolve and people will just start screaming at each other and like calling each other names or whatever. This is broken down no less. Well, okay, a little less, but like this is also broken down substantially. We're not making arguments. We haven't been for a while. A lot of what's on trial is nothing to do with the topic of discussion, and and we're like straying more and more from the slight amount of productivity we had. It just doesn't look the same, but that's just an aesthetic difference.
United States of America is referring to something which is a godless secular system. Or I don't understand all the speeches I listen to.
Yeah, I mean, "In God We Trust" is a big thing.
But the
God
point is
bless America. Like
that
every politician feels like a
my
twitch
way
they
of
have to say
dealing
it.
with the
"In God We
secular
Trust"
or
is now the
separating
national
I don't have a
motto.
problem with separating
I think it should
authorities.
change back to
I don't have a problem
pluralism,
with this.
honestly.
And even my
And
solution
it's like, to what
in
extent is
Israel
that
and with Palestine.
secular?
I want
And I think we're
one state
failing
where
in
the
that
people
regard.
can live together under the
But that
same rule of
failure
law.
is
But
not
it's
a
as if
rejection of the concept.
we agree on this in France, but not really in Israel, because it wouldn't be Israel. So it's a selective, not consistent approach. I want you to say this everywhere in that way, and then you are saying it, but I would say that the people who are uploading sometimes, they want this for some and not for all. So
I
let me
missed a
tell you
little what he
something.
said, but I don't care enough to go back in
I'm
large part because things have devolved so
critical
much,
from
and
within.
I'm getting
And I think
weary
that
of
I'm
talking to
far
myself
from
for so
being
long.
the only one. And from within the Islamic tradition, listen to also, for example, the Western Muslims who, the way they were dealing with the September 11th, the way they were dealing with the cartoon crisis, the way they were dealing with fitna. Many of them
I'm not sure what
were
that last thing
saying,
is.
no, don't be involved. In the United States of America, how the Muslims reacted to all this controversy on the mosque here in New York, or in burning the Quran Day.
The
Listen.
mosque in New York, for those of you who don't remember, this is quite a while ago, there was a huge kerfuffle over this mosque that was going to be established. I don't know if it was being built or whatever else, but like it was going to be established in New York, and they were like, it's on ground zero, which wasn't the case. It was like several blocks away, and even if it were, a block away, like obviously it's not going to be on ground zero. That's a memorial now, but no, ground zero for the Twin Towers, by the way. But even if it were, on the same block, so what, right? Like freedom of religion means that you have freedom to create a mosque if that's what you want to do. There's no area that is specifically like immoral to put one. I understand that the people who carried out the attacks on 9/11 were Muslim, but that's that has nothing to do with this, right? And yet there was this enormous controversy, and it was literally like a formal Burlington coat factory 8 blocks away or something absurd like that. Like even like it's one of those, even if it was right next door to Ground Zero, it wouldn't have been a problem. And it wasn't. It was just on the same island. What, there can't be mosques in New York? That's the opposite of religious freedom. But there's that this is the the fallout of that huge wave of Islamophobia that we're still seeing.
Were they all violent, or have you heard some voices of reason and peace in this country? I think if you are honest, you heard these voices of peace.
And of course, because like
people
Muslims,
referring
like
to
all
their
groups of
religion
people,
and
have
say,
a lot of
we
different
are
ideas about things.
Americans, and what we want
And
for
this
this
is why
country is a peaceful
discussion should not have been about what people do, but the inherent danger and the inherent risk of any religion, in this case Islam. And this is where bad arguments get you to more bad arguments, get you to incoherence and arguing past each other and yeah, just really bad argumentation. I honestly don't think that Hitchens was a particularly good debater. I think he was often effective, but not very good. And I think a lot of the fallout is because of this. I don't know much about Ramadan as far as debate. I've only ever seen him in this debate, and he seems fine. Like he seems about the same, right? Like not like this is just the kind of conversation we're having, and it's not a good one.
proactive existence and coexistence. I think that this is also coming from their ethics, their values,
And I hope
you
this
have to
dispels
value
an
this
illusion a little
as
bit.
being the future. So to dream
That
of something which is
formal
a godless
debates
future, I think it's a wrong dream.
Are in
But
any
to
way
be
better
able
than
to deal with all this
than internet
diversity and to
debates.
listen to
Not
the voices
necessarily.
instead
The
of
debate we saw a couple days ago
rejecting
was
an entity as something which
leagues
is
better
bad per se,
argued
let us
on
look at
both
the people who
sides
from within
than
are
this
trying
one,
to
even
do
though I
good
think
with
there were a lot
what
of problems
they
with that
are
one.
and
Like
what
the
they believe
but
in.
the
I
debate
think
from
that
2
this
days ago
is
was
the way forward
was
for all of us.
exceptionally
And
well
this is
done
the way
compared to
I
this.
would
I think
put it
they did a pretty good job.
for the future. And
They did a moderately good
I'm
job.
not talking about wrong Muslims. I'm talking about a critical debate among Muslims, and I hope that you yourself,
This is the implication
with
towards
the
reform
people
that he
who
was
are
talking about.
supporting some of the views, you are also critical about the way you sometimes reduce the other to an alien presence, not helping us to get to a
think
better
Hitchens
understanding,
does
a
that
critical debate.
That much with
Sometimes
Muslims. He
I'm
does that a
just
lot with
lost with the
religion,
way you
and
put
people get
things
caught
because
up with that
the
identity.
debate is
Um,
closed before it started. Thank you.
But like, if you're surrounded by this assumption of Islamophobia, to have any arguments like this does feel like like he's doing that, even though he's not. I don't think. We'll do at least a
I'm
little of the Q&A.
Try to get to
but
the core
because
of
I
some
think-
of what you
I
raised,
think that
and then
can
get
be
to some
valuable,
questions.
but
We
we'll see how long
that
I'm
ran
willing to
long,
put
but
up
I
with
think
this.
it was
This
very
is
fruitful.
well and
I
truly
want to
been,
distill something that came up here.
pretty
Two important
unproductive.
things.
This
One
is
is
more
the
a
question
platform
of
for people
authority
to
in
say what
Islam.
they think than to argue
A
what they
scholar
think with
once
each
told
other.
me that he thinks the problem with Islam is that every Tom, Dick, and Harry can give fatwa, and that there's no pope, there's no magisterium, and so in some ways what you have
And by the way,
is,
not having a pope
leadership
is
by
not
whoever
inherently
has,
a bad thing,
the
right?
biggest audience.
This is the question. Like, sure, everyone has every Tom, Dick, and Harry has the right to give fatwa. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but it's like, oh, there's a lot of people with this power to do this thing. Well, I don't know if it's necessarily better for one person to have that power and you're just subject to the whims of whatever they do. As much as there have been popes that are pretty good for popes, there have also been a lot of popes that really aren't. And it's like, okay, yeah, like not everyone can declare a crusade, so that's cool, I guess. But the one guy did, or the several popes, I don't know how many popes made crusades happen, but and there was enormous power behind that one person. Is the trade-off of centralizing power or not. It's how do you? I don't have a good answer to that either, but that is it's not it's not exclusively a bad thing. I don't think to have a lack of central authority in this way.
Now, right now, one of the most revered uh, scholars is Yusuf al-Qaradawi, and he says he takes an opposite position from Professor Ramadan on the question
question's
of
taking way too long to ask.
suicide attacks in Israel. He has a program with 40 million listeners, and he has a website. And he says that suicide attacks on Israeli citizens, even women and children, are acceptable because all of Israel is a militarized society and all citizens are combatants. So the question here is, he has, he's got
I'm gonna have to
this
get used
very
to
large
being at
audience,
this for a long
and
time,
since
'cause
there
some
is
of the
no
debates we have coming up
arbitrating
are
authority, there's no
2.5 hours, 3 hours, and I'm pausing in the middle of all of those.
Whoever
Ooh, we can be
has
at this for a
has the
while.
biggest
Maybe I'll save those
audience
for days where I have
has the sway in what
less
the
to do
faith is.
later, and I can just keep going.
I think that
If I have to go for 5 hours, we'll go for 5 hours, 6 hours, whatever.
no, I think it's true. If we
Or
look
maybe
at
we'll
what is
split them
happening
up
now in the
depending on
Muslim
how long
majority
they are.
countries as well as in the
It'll
West,
be more interesting with more
that
people
there is
watching.
something
but
that
for
we
now,
can call
so
a crisis
starting.
of authority. In the book Radical Reform, I'm tackling this from many viewpoints, and not only
And I'm not
from
really paying much attention to this question
political
because it just seems
discussion. It's really even in our
just
way
a
to deal with
bad
sciences,
point of
human
discussion.
sciences,
It's just not that
ethics.
interesting.
We have this problem.
It's slightly off topic.
When you don't know how to manage diversity, it ends up with division and not knowing who is leading. And this is the way. We don't have a church, so we have diversity in Islam. So we have to know how to manage this, and it's problematic. And I would say that if you look today at what is happening, even though we have this crisis, if you look today at what is happening around the world, you will see that we have many councils. Still, the mainstream is not promoting, violence and extremist views. The mainstream is promoting, what is said, for example, about Western Muslims or Muslims living in Muslim majority countries is about transparency, no corruption, democratization. This is the mainstream that is coming. Now we have voices. And you speak about Yusuf al-Qaradawi, and you were saying that I was one of supporters of him. I have one position in everyone and everybody I'm dealing with, in history, in the past, and as is even
For the
the
most part,
present.
he's not really
I read what
saying
is said,
much of
and I
substance so much
try
as
to be selective.
to color
So,
the,
for example, on
his,
that
you
point,
know, the view
killing,
of
I said no, I disagree. On identity, and when he once was very harsh with me saying, no, we have one identity and it's Islamic, I said, no, we have multiple identity. I'm Swiss by nationality, Egyptian by memory, Muslim by religion, European by culture. These are my identities. He didn't agree. So I talk to people, but I know that on this, for example, in Israel, I disagree with him, but you cannot reduce Yusuf al-Qaradawi in the world today to this position.
I don't know
because
who
he
this
had
person
many
is,
other
and I'm, you know what? Let's distract ourselves a bit. Let's get on to something. Do a little bit of investigation. Just to get away from the bad arguments. And see. Okay, so Yusuf al-Qaradawi. I'm sure I pronounced that poorly. Just Islamic scholar based in Qatar. Let's see. Apparently he died fairly recently, just last year. All right. Wrote on the danger of extremist groups in Islam. There's a lot more to go into. I'm not going to read the whole Wikipedia. I just want to see like some of the brief ideas they were talking about here. Seems like he was these views seem very respectable from what I've seen. Like the little I've seen. This is the tiniest dip into it. I'm barely even reading the first sentence of these sections, so don't. Reported that which was president had used. Okay, well that's not great. In August 2005, Wall Street Journal reported that the Dublin-based European Council for Fatwa and Research, of which al-Qaradawi was president, had used the anti-Semitic protocols of the Elders of Zion in its theological deliberations, which is a monumental oof. I don't know how much it comes up here. during the Gaza war. For a little bit of context, the things I know about this is that this is a completely fabricated document that was used to um, slander Jewish people and is used as justifications for violence against Jews. It's it's pretty terrible. Maybe we'll add that to we're gonna add that as like a maybe. uh, just a brief instant glimpse into my shorthand. I'll put a question mark in front of something if I mean it not as a question so much as I am unsure if this is a good idea or not. So now you see that. So uh, let's be clear that I'm not like even pretending to justify this. No, I want maybe in future will all these phone calls. Give me one moment. I'm gonna actually take this one. Okay. I should have not taken that one. I'm glad I wasn't taking the other ones. They're all spam. I'm sorry for the disruptions. Uh, so yeah, maybe we'll look into this at some point, but I guess not. But perhaps not. Uh, so it seems like some of his views, at a minimum, were uh not particularly kind towards Jewish people. So how do you feel about apostasy? Okay, this is the part. So the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the part that Ramadan is referring to. Support a suicide attack on Israeli. Okay, so okay, at a brief glance, and please feel free to do more research on who this guy was if you feel it's relevant, and please do not take my opinion as a definitive statement on it. But it seems like this guy did not have particularly good views about Jewish people, and and supported a lot of really terrible things. Apparently, Ramadan was associated with Al Qaradawi in some regard, but is saying outright that he disagrees with him on this aspect. Okay, like I'm not making a judgment on Ramadan in this case, just saying like this is the context for what
Positions
he's
on
talking about.
women, on the society, on
I'm glad
democracy.
he
He is
disagrees
promoting something
with
which is he
with
called democracy in the
violence,
Muslim majority country,
especially
that you
against
have to
non-combatants.
consider by saying, okay, on this we disagree, and on that we need to have a critical debate. You cannot just because one position we don't like one position, we remove the people from
But like
the
critical debate, this
landscape.
is
No, they
like
are part of the landscape.
the hashtag problem with centrism, right? Like the midpoint between hey, maybe genocide Jewish people, which I'm not sure that he said, but like like that hypothetical position, uh, and hey, let's don't do that is like what? Do half a genocide? Like the or like well, we'll talk about like both of them are equal. Like they're not. They're not. Genocide not good. Don't support genocides. That's controversial but official take of the Earnest Engagement channel. Genocide bad. Don't support. Don't kill people. Killing people is not good. Uh, and I don't love when people are like, well, we'll just hear out both sides. I know like we have different views. Some of you are like okay with genocide. Like no, that's not. Some views are not uh, like in a way not worth hearing out, or at the very least, not all views are equal, and the view that genocide is good is definitely not equal to the concept that it's not.
And they are heard in the Muslim majority countries. So this is my position on that.
Well, I'm certainly not going to criticize Islam for not having a pope.
And there's the
And
anti-authoritarianism.
in fact, it would be your
of course.
vis-a-vis in this discussion was horribly in error in any case, in that Christianity never had only one pope, and still doesn't. I mean, there were several Catholic claimants to the papacy at different times, just among Roman
Which is
Catholics,
interesting, but like
today I
off
mentioned
topic.
one of
Okay,
them.
sure.
the Pope of the Coptic Christians based in Cairo. The Eastern Orthodox don't call their leader the Pope, they call him the Patriarch, but the Christian world is full of Pope types, usually anathematizing one another. The Pope is just the word that innocent Americans use for the man who claims to be the leader of the Roman Catholics. So I don't think it's possible, in fact, to have a moral authority within religion, because I think the two things are so sharply divorced. But this doesn't lead to just chaos, because, and it certainly doesn't lead to the dictatorship of minorities or extremists. I'll give you two examples quickly. In the case of the moral blackmail of Denmark that was backed up by a physical threat to destroy its economy and burn out its embassies across the world, a well-coordinated attack of sabotage against a small European democracy. The organizing group was a thing called the OIC, the Organization of the Islamic Congress. Groups all the Muslim countries in the world. It's an increasingly powerful lobby at the United Nations, hopes to pass an international resolution forbidding all criticism of religion, all forms of blasphemy and profanity. Every ambassador of those countries in Copenhagen went to Mr. Rasmussen, the Prime Minister of Denmark, and told him, under the threat of violence, he should change his law so as to allow him to determine what went into the Danish newspapers. And when he said he couldn't do that, things got a lot worse. Now that's the ambassador of Egypt, and the ambassador of Turkey, and the ambassador of Algeria.
Now, of course, that there are authoritarians who are Muslim does not, like, again, we're just so off topic. We're just not talking about Islam. We're far more talking about Muslims, and that there are people who are Muslim and authoritarian doesn't really speak to the religion, but not directly. What does speak to it is that religions are very useful tools for authoritarians. This is why even people like Stalin tried to deify themselves, make a religion unto themselves to codify their power. The Nazis did this too, tried to tie themselves to religion. It's just a really, really useful tool for anyone who, if for an authoritarian, and that danger is another reason why it's like not peaceful, because it's just too good at being destructive, even if it doesn't necessarily have to be.
Egypt containing an enormous Christian population, coming to you as if they spoke for a religion. Either this claim is true or it is not. It's self-evidently not true, but it is certainly made. Let's be in any doubt about it. And let's have any doubt that it means to extend its influence over the people who are sitting in this hall. Second, very quick, the fatwa against Salman Rushdie, in other words, the offer of money to suborn murder for the crime of writing a work of fiction in his own name by the spiritual leader of Shia Islam, that's what the fatwa meant then, means now, was, after the murder of many people, associated or not with the publication of the book, repudiated ostensibly by the Iranian government after long pressure.
This is what I was talking about before, the fatwa against Salman Rushdie. I didn't realize it had been called off.
But I've been since then, I've had the pleasure of going to Friday prayers at Tehran University, twice, to hear the sermon. And on both occasions, there were banners and slogans saying that the Imam's holy sentence against Salman Rushdie will never die. It hasn't died with the Imam. Khomeini's death warrant will always be carried out. Not, I think, a very good use of the premises of a university. I can't speak for whether it's a good occasion for Friday prayers or not. Well, it brings me to a second point. You see, there's something shady involved here. Some people say that Islam and Islamists give themselves permission to lie to non-believers. Sounds like the sort of vulgar paranoid.
So before we move off of what he was just talking about, I think it's important to note, this is why what would be more productive than a discussion of like the essentialism of Islam would be religious studies is understanding why things are like this, but moreover, sociological, geopolitical understanding of why this is the case. This is the thing that happens a lot. People like to say, this thing or person is essentially this way, but instead we ought to ask, why do we see these trends? This would happen a lot with people, with the gender pay gap. People are like, oh no, if you exclude these factors, it's women make like different go into different career fields, and once you factor that in, it mostly goes away, but still doesn't. Well, okay, but then ask like one, that still doesn't work, but two, then ask, okay, but why? Why do women make those choices? That are there's like their brains wired different? No, obviously not. Not so much so that we should see these enormous trends. There are social reasons for this, and these things are relevant also. If there are social trends that push women into careers that are less economically valued, well, okay, is that really like maybe that's something to be considered, you know? But we don't ask those questions, especially not uh, with essentialist thinking, and that's what we're seeing a little bit. I mean, even the topic of discussion is just is built that way, built to derive essentialist answers. And I think essentialism is a huge problem in the world.
Thing that an Islamophobe would go around saying, doesn't it? It's very easy to disprove, except that it hasn't been, as that example will just illustrate. And these are not minor threats. These are threats to the very core of what we believe is the essential thing for a society, which is the ability to ask questions, to read the books we choose.
I think for
To pursue
Hitchens, and this is something I've been trying to like figure out since we started, is because when we discussed Vosh and Dr. Bergardin, we were taught. I mentioned that Dr. Bergardin is pretty clearly coming at things from a metaphysical framework, and Vosh from a sociological one. And I've been trying to figure out the best way to describe the the approach that has been taken in this debate from both sides. And I think the way I would describe it is to say that Hitchens Hitchens is approaching things with the idea that you are what you do, and that systems are what the people within them do. So at some level, so that when you keep that in mind, it makes a lot of sense that he would talk a lot about what the adherents of Islam are doing and not what the book says, because in a way it doesn't matter. This is the force it has on the world, and this also is how you can square these positions with what he has said previously, which I know we haven't seen, but like I'll recount here about the Catholic Church, which is that he would not have said in the first half of the 20th century that Islam was the greatest threat to the world, but rather that the Catholic Church was because of their agreements with the Nazis. Maybe agreements isn't the right word, but the distinction then, right, is that what they were doing then was a huge problem, less so now, and but still a problem, and it is what's being done that is the most important. Now, not to say that this is incorrect, but it is at odds with how most people view an essentialist question like this. And this is why, like, even after all this time, and I've seen this debate before, and even now, I'm only just now coming to this understanding. This is why making things more explicit is often helpful. That understanding would change a lot of how the debate is approached. A lot of his arguments make a lot more sense when you think about it in that way. And I think with Ramadan, it's similar. It's just that his view of what people do is obviously going to be different because he's in a position where he is talking with and working with a lot more, or I shouldn't say a lot more, but like a lot of Muslims who are opposed to violence, as he has taken the position of here, and it is, when you approach it that way, like how good or bad is what people do, well, you need a framework and yada yada, etc. I won't get into that too much, but it's interesting, I think, that we can see this framework now.
Investigations. And these are flatly negated by the claims of a religion that says it is the answer to everything.
Can I respond to this?
Yes.
Because really, I think that no.
Is the taqiyya question?
No. The taqiyya question is no. The point is, on the cartoon issue, the way you are translating things is problematic. Let me just come to some of the facts here very quickly. The first thing is that it happened in October that the cartoon were published. Between October till January, nothing happened. And I met the Muslim organizations in Denmark, and I told them, and many were of the opinion, don't react. The ambassadors of Muslim majority countries and Arab countries mainly asked the Prime Minister to meet with them. He refused. And my position that he made a mistake here, because he should have met them, telling them, I have no say in this. It has to do with freedom of media. This is not of my business. He didn't do this. They took it as humiliation. They went back. They bought the tickets. No, but look.
Easily.
No, let me finish, because we will come to the point here. They went back and they bought the ticket of a group of Muslims, among them Muslim leaders in Denmark, to go to Muslim majority countries to just present what was done. Tell me, Egypt is ruled by Islam? Is it Islam which is used there? Mubarak is a secular president, isn't it? Syria is a Muslim leader or is a secular state?
I don't know enough
All
about the
main
geopolitics here,
societies
especially not then.
where the
So we do
government
weigh in here.
used
So I'm
this,
just going to
because you know
let
what
him speak.
happened
Let them speak
is
about it.
it's easier to use
Not
the
interrupt.
people to tell them against the West you can demonstrate, but not against the government, which is an autocratic government. So it's not religion, it's political instrumentalization of popular emotions against the West just to make it a religious issue. You cannot just avoid talking about political instrumentalization of countries where there is no democracy. And these countries are not Islamist countries, they are secular, autocratic countries.
On your, third point, I can't possibly disagree with you. Of course, there's a great deal of opportunism and demagogy, and I'm certain hypocrisy as well. And in fact, I will say that I've heard you.
I will, by the way, say that I was a little annoyed that the moderator wanted to stop this. This back and forth discussion is so much better for actually discussing ideas than the regimented way they were doing things. I have done competitive debate, and there is a way that can be regimented, where it can be regimented. You can still get that a little bit of back and forth in a meaningful way, but an open conversation at some point is generally going to be more conducive. It's at least in terms of time efficiency. So I'm glad he just plowed on, irrespective of the protestations of the moderator.
And seen you saying that before, and I agree. I don't think I would classify
But of course,
a country that holds.
Of course, she's chiming in because that's how these debates go, right? Like it's in large part about the show. You want to get through the stuff you want to get through, and you only have so much time. So not like blaming her or anything, but it's just a problem with the format.
The Christian leader of its minority onto the TV to say no, it's not possible. There could have been any.
Exactly the same
correction.
political
It's a secular one.
instrumentalization.
No, to give you a trivial example.
Instrumentalization.
No, I would not. Nor would I describe the Alawite regime. It's an Alawite sectarian regime, not a secular one, that is funded by Tehran and is the funder of the murder gang Hezbollah as secular either. No, don't insult me. Not that it really hurts me that much. I don't feel humiliated or anything.
All right,
No,
we're
but
going
whereas
to
apparently,
take some
apparently the
questions.
leader of a proud country like Egypt, when a demand he makes to interfere in the internal affairs of Denmark, is not met, feels
so off
I'm
topic.
sorry, I just to end this discussion for me on my side.
Except for the idea that Hitchens considers these actions as, maybe not even. I guess representative is accurate, but I think it's disingenuous to how his framework works. Is viewing. Remember, what is done by the adherents is what you are what you do, and what you're for religion, what you do is what your adherents do. And, but we're just so off topic.
Is the only fact that you acknowledge that there is a political instrumentalization of religion, and you say I'm right. That's enough for me. This is exactly what I mean.
Oh my god! Yeah, this is just this is like lots of posturing and stuff.
Earlier, you were trying to tell me what Karl Marx said on the subject.
That's your.
Like I said, it's just posture. This is for real. This is the formal, like dignified, quote unquote, suit and tie version of streamers calling each other pedophiles on the internet. Like this, for real, like that's just what we saw right there. I also, I thought I heard the moderator say that we're gonna move on to questions from the audience, and so it's a little wild that the only subject of discussion that they were trying to do was on this one topic, and like maybe they just were like, okay, we don't have time for a second one, but it's weird that we were like, we have exactly one topic of discussion that we'll engage in before audience questions and with a back and forth. That's really weird to me.
Was that a valuable exchange? I think that was worth.
No,
worth
not even a little. No, not even
But
slightly.
I know that there are people in the room and also listening in from the satellite sites who want to have some of their questions asked. And a few of them are along these lines, and they actually are aimed at you, Mr. Hitchens, because of your ringing endorsement, really, of a secular society and atheism. A question from Vail, Colorado. Do Jewish, Christian, or other religions have a greater claim on being religions of peace than Islam? I mean, is your beef really with Islam, or is it with
and
all
so this
religion?
Well,
it's
I'm
a
sorry.
little unfortunate it is taking this long to be made explicit, but like Jim's like, no, you all suck. We just happen to be talking about Islam right now. But it's all bad.
The comrade from Yale tuned in so late. I mean, late enough to miss the first 4 or 5 minutes of my 10-minute introduction, devoted to a close.
Well, he says that,
exegesis
but
of
you
Professor
wasn't as
McCulloch's
explicit
realization
as
that Christianity
I think he thought.
had
He might have thought.
genocided and outwarred and outcrusaded itself. Finally, by 1914. If you care to pick up, I think you might be able to, and I'll sign it if you will. Pick it up. My book, God Is Not Great. You will find a discussion of the warrants for slavery, murder, genocide, and land theft that occur in the books of Moses, and that are an ineffaceable offense to any civilized person, and the reason why so many Jews are secular, at least one of the reasons.
Yeah, I had heard that part of the reason for Jews being more likely to be secular or atheist is that after World War II, there were some number of rabbis who were making the argument that like the Holocaust was the punishment for the Jews for not following the law and not living in Israel and yada. And as you might imagine, people did not take this well, and there's a lot of pushback. Now, I don't. Again, this is one of those like I had heard this. Maybe I should look into it more. I don't feel like doing that now, but yeah, there's like there was a lot of as it turns out, when there's a genocide, it has a large cultural impact in many ways.
So again, I could go on, but I really feel I don't need to.
Okay. A corollary question, maybe it's just something funny. Would atheism be a non-religion of peace? That came
No.
from somewhere here.
Yeah, the question doesn't really make sense. So there's a lot of what's the word I want? I can't find it. There's a lot of conflation. That's the word I want. Of atheism as basically just religion, but the God is no God, right? And it doesn't work that way. Atheism is merely the position that when asked, do you believe in God, you answer no. It is a statement of non-belief, not a statement of anti-belief that there is no God, not a belief in the non-existence, not Satan worship as some people think. Though the Satanic Temple has contributed somewhat to that misunderstanding in a way where like it makes a lot. I'm not blaming them. It's just very funny that. I don't know. It's like fighting misunderstanding with more misunderstanding.
No,
I won't get into it
there's
too much,
something
but they were
probably
very
very
funny.
slightly intolerant about atheism, at least so I hope. I might just say, though, because I really think Professor Ramadan misunderstood me. When I say the American Constitution is godless, I was quoting the title of a famous study of it by Professor Israel Kramnik. What I mean by that is to say, the US Constitution only mentions religion and God in its preambles when it means to say the ways in which they must be kept out of the public square. That happens to be a fact about our Constitution and the reason why we still have it. Otherwise,
Also, as far as like godlessness, hold on. I want to like find the Establishment Clause Um, because I don't remember. Uh, Okay, so it is in the First Amendment. Yeah, yeah. For some reason I thought it was like the first article or something, but no, like, never mind. But yeah, like explicit prohibition on the government respecting of establishing a religion. It's the actual. Let me see if I can find the actual clause. Uh, hmm. Hold on. I just want to find it real quick. Yeah, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting its free exercise. Or I think it's prohibiting the free exercise thereof is the actual wording. Like this is what he means by godless, is that we are very explicitly not establishing a state religion.
As the Republic would have been destroyed long before, and that its First Amendment says that religion can be no business of the government, a statement no Muslim society could begin to make. Thank you.
That's not entirely true. A Muslim society could make that, but not a
But
not
once
a
again,
Muslim
you can just
theocracy.
refer to the Constitution, and you will have
And then the
Muslims
question, of
just
course, is
referring to
what
text and
do they
avoiding
do?
the practical
And in practice,
uh,
presently,
consequences and
do
sometimes the
not do.
policies that are promoted in one country. And remember that the previous president,
As
George,
a reminder, like the reason why I keep saying these exceptions, even though I agree with him principally, is that time and space are pretty relevant to all these things. Is my understanding that during the Islamic Golden Age, freedom of religion was highly valued. There were a lot of different beliefs in the Middle East during that time, and as my understanding, they were like more or less free to believe whatever you like. I don't know if that's actually how much that's the case. And again, I'm like getting weird. I don't want to do that much deep diving and research on subtopics, but that's why I say like, yeah, a Muslim society could allow for religious freedom. In practice today, they tend not to, and especially not in a theocracy is that possible.
W. Bush, was talking when going not for the same reasons as you, or not from the same source, because you were supporting the war in Iraq, but he was doing it in the name of God. So the Constitution here is not preventing someone from within to speak in the name of God, even if he's supporting exactly the same thing that in the name of the peace that you are promoting, you were for the war in Iraq.
I mean,
I can't imagine you're going to defend President Bush here.
well, from that, well,
Well, I don't know if he does here, but he's
from that
he
charge,
had
I can,
different-
no one was ever summoned to vote for the war in Iraq in the name of God, and the president's own church, as well as every other church, Christian church that I know of, was opposed to the war. For whatever little difference that might make, none to me.
I think this one is for Professor Ramadan. Why are there no progressive Muslim majority countries with rights for
So
women?
the answer to that question is one that is not suited to this kind of discussion because I have to imagine it would take a long time to get into, but but it's a similar reason why there were no like it's remember it's place and time. There's a lot of factors that are go into this that are not just religion. A lot of people want to say like, oh, they're Muslim and they're like this and that's just how they're. But like, it is as likely to be that religion is a tool being used by the authoritarians there as well. Maybe I shouldn't say as likely, but it is possible that it is in that direction, right? That there are authoritarians for sociological, geopolitical, and so forth reasons, and religion is a tool that they use, and this is the religion that is most prevalent in these areas. While it is also possible, though I think significantly less likely, that well they're Muslims so they believe these authoritarian things so they try to be authoritarian. Because as it turns out, the reason why I think that is less likely is, in the United States there is, at last I heard it was like 3 million or 3 million Muslim Americans, and they tend to be more progressive than a lot of Christians, for example, who in this country have been more and more authoritarian. So it's not that I don't think that it's religion that makes people authoritarian so much as authoritarianism is very good at using religion to gain strength and power, and religion is very susceptible for being used in that way, or susceptible to being used
And
in that way.
homosexuals, etc. Go ahead.
No, I think that once again, if you look at the Muslim majority countries, we cannot just have something which is
Like, is it a
analytic
coincidence
vision
that
of what is happening.
all these countries that have been
What is happening now
impoverished by a
in,
lot of like
Muslim majority
neo-imperialism,
countries
which
is
I won't get
really
into,
before
are
just looking
authoritarian?
at some
Probably
dimensions
not.
of the
And they just
rights
happen
of
to be Muslim, you know.
women within or the rights of homosexuals, for example, is really to look at the situation in the whole society and the way it's progressing. Now we have the great majority of the Arab countries.
And as a
that
reminder,
are
'cause I
under
got baited into this
dictatorships. There is
discussion,
no
like,
freedom.
this is
Religious or
way
secular
off topic,
society,
right?
this is the same for all.
But it's
So
because we
if you
don't
look at
we
this
hadn't
and you're
established how we're
expecting
going
from within
to
an evolution in this society,
track
forget
these
about
metrics.
it.
Actually,
Look now,
that brings me to another concept that I had completely forgotten about until this moment. So, in formal debate, there are these concepts, or at the very least in the type of debate I used to do called Lincoln Douglas debate, there are concepts of primary value and value criterion, also known as a standard. And maybe I'll probably fill this in off stream because I don't want to do this. We're I'm already getting worn out from this video, and we still have more to get through. But basically, what matters more here is the value criterion. This is what we are going to use in the debate to determine who basically who is right on this subject. So as an example, someone might say, like, is democracy good? And like the reason why I think, and like if I say yes, it's because my primary value is freedom, and the way we get there is through individual rights, for example. If people agree, if that is agreed upon, then the idea is we ask, does democracy do a better job at arriving at individual rights and therefore freedom than alternatives, or just the binary? Is it good at doing that? Yes or no? And we don't have anything like that in this debate. It was a glaring thing. It was glaringly missing, and it impacted everything. Everything that got us to here, we're not really making arguments anymore, and we're not really on topic. It's because we couldn't figure out what the topic was. We couldn't figure out how do we determine. And I don't mean determine in like a philosophical sense. I mean like in an argumentative sense. For the audience, what should you use as you're watching this to determine the truth of the matter asserted? And I think Hitchens de facto was saying that the metric we should use is what do its adherents do, because you are what you do. Again, back to that whole thing. We didn't. I don't think we really got. I didn't really see what anything that I would attribute to Ramadan as his version of that. Maybe he would say like kind of, and like, but they do a lot of different things. I don't know. But we don't really have a good mechanism, and so that's why everything feels off topic. Because like,
at what
are
is
we
happening
talking about Islam in general?
Turkey
Not really.
is changing, moving towards something which is
We're going to be done with
a
this
more
pretty soon, I think.
democratic system.
I'm not going to
and
watch
you
all
see
of this thing.
within
Maybe one more
that
question,
are
and then we
rights
can
and
knock
discussion
out,
and
'cause
critical discussion
we
that are
have
possible.
long since
So I
stopped
would
being
say that
productive.
you cannot
And
essentialize
I'm even finding
history
that
and
I
say
have
the
more
Muslims cannot do
energy
this. It's evolving and it's
as-
changing,
while I'm
and it
not paying
depends
attention to
where
this.
you can have this kind of discussion. And the first, because there are priorities, the first is really to go towards democratization and transparency in the Muslim majority countries. And if you go to Indonesia, even though we are far from a perfect system, you have much more discussion in Indonesia today about the principles, the critical reading of the text than you have in Arab countries.
Kind of going
So
on. I
would
don't have
say,
anything to say. I feel bad just letting
it's
it run.
evolving. There is no status quo. And now what is also interesting is look at what the Western Muslims living in democratic system, when they can express themselves, when they are enjoying freedom and they are not under the political pressure, what they are producing as the Islamic contemporary thought. It's moving. We are talking about citizenship. We are promoting women's rights. We are promoting the rights of the people to live and to be respected without discrimination.
Yeah.
So
there
look
are
at
some
the
people,
different
people have different ideas about
you
stuff,
can
but
see
the
that
question
it's
is,
moving and it's changing, and there are
because we're
new
trying to answer
answers
an
for new
essentialist
challenges
question.
coming from Muslims.
Are you saying
that
Turkey is moving
disagreement
in
is
a
not-
progressive direction as it becomes more Islamist? Is that what you're saying?
That's quite interesting, the way you translate what I said.
Yeah.
It says much more about what you think than what I said. But
Well, wait,
let me finish.
you said it was
No,
moving in a
she-
more progressive direction.
No, what I said is that even the people who are now leading the country, that they are referring to Islam and they were perceived as Islamists, now we don't know how to call them. Are they Islamist, or are they moderate Muslims, or are they ex-Islamists? The point is that no one here can deny the fact that not only the government, because we can be and we should be critical towards the government, but the people around and the intellectuals in Turkey and within even the party, you have new thoughts, and they are coming with something that we didn't see even in the Muslim majority countries, in the Arab countries. So speaking about the rule of law and democracy and transparency, separating and promoting what they are trying to promote, and to be in tune today with the European principles. And I would say this is the only thing for me which is important. If, for example, Turkey is abiding by the European rules, they should be able to integrate European Union, and not what we have now, because it's a Muslim majority country. We don't care about what they are trying to do. So don't reduce Turkey to labels. There are dynamics, there are people who are promoting things that are quite interesting.
A more nuanced
I went there
discussion is
many
going
times,
to be more
and I can
productive.
tell you the women
We
in
don't really
Turkey,
have the tools of
Turkish
doing that
women,
here, in part
for
because of
all the
how much things
trends,
have
not
broken
only
down.
from the
I
secular,
understand
for the Islamists,
his
everywhere.
desire
they are
for
promoting
something
a better understanding of
more
Islam,
nuanced and
a
productive
better
than what we got here. But he also, I think,
acknowledging
didn't
and
succeed at contributing towards the
resisting
kind of discussion he
discriminations
wanted
and
to have.
trying to work for more autonomy. And I would say this is what I said, and this is what I promote.
Well, actually, I agree with you that there was a very ossified, Ataturkist, bureaucratic, intolerant system that, to some extent, has been opened by the challenge from Mr. Erdogan's party. But the reason why Turkey continues to be looked on askance by so much of Europe is not because it's a Muslim majority country. It was a Muslim majority country long before the European Union was formed. And no one's just discovered that. The faith of most of its people is Muslim. It's because of legal and political reasons. One of them is continued illegal occupation of the Republic of Cyprus, which is already a member of the European Union, and the expulsion of a large proportion of its population, the reduction of them.
Yeah.
to
Okay.
refugee
I
status.
think I've had about enough. Now we're getting into just more like into the weeds about this geopolitical stuff that doesn't really have anything to do with the question in hand. So, what do we think? On the whole, I am very glad we went over this because it is a great example of how we're gonna switch this view. We don't need to see that anymore. You can look at my gorgeous face. Anyway, I think it's a great example of how even formal debates can break down, and that they do break down, and the presumption of the like air of propriety and superiority of formal debates is kind of a myth. That said, there's a bit of a requirement of understanding how to access what's like. You can't, like, it's not the same as an online debate. You won't have people just start screaming that each other are pedophiles, and that's how you know everything is broken down. Instead, it kind of looks like this. It's really hard to pin down unless you're picking it apart and noticing the problems from the beginning, and as they ramp up and stuff like this. It's pretty annoying and honestly pretty boring. I did find that this was a lot more boring in the context of putting our full attention into it, really trying to break it down. That's okay. Debates don't have to be entertaining. at the very least, if they are productive. I think a productive but boring debate uh, is the kind of thing that has a lot of good place. But obviously, people go to this for entertainment, especially in a context like this. There's a literal audience. They're sold tickets, or at least I assume they sold tickets. Like people are there to be entertained with the with the while pretending that we're here to learn and to be productive and whatever. They can be productive, but that's not what we saw here. And we saw a lot of things breaking down, and I think it's good to see. I'm glad we went over it. I'm glad it's over. We'll get to more entertaining stuff on Monday. Let's be. I I came to the conclusion about we'll be sticking to a stream schedule, just so there's a little bit more certainty about when I'm doing things. I'm gonna put it on my channel description sometime over the weekend, so it'll be more clear. But we're gonna try for Monday through Friday, starting at 2 p.m. Maybe I start a little early, maybe I start a little after, but around there, and go until we don't want to go anymore. Or maybe it'll be brief because I have stuff to do, or there's not much to talk about, or maybe we'll go for like 7 hours because we're watching a 3-hour video and I cannot shut the fuck up. But that's the plan. I think on Monday, what we're going to do, because a lot of the concepts that I felt were coming up are going to be relevant for it. It happens to be the next video on the list, actually, and I'll go back to the other view, is this debate with Destiny and the Muslim skeptic. Oh, screw it. I'll have it ready here. I think a lot of this will be certainly more entertaining. So we'll have that. It'll be a lot more bombastic because these are two uh, lively debaters, and that's something like I don't want to again like we're complaining about the boringness. I don't really want to be too mean about that. Hitchens was literally dying. Ramadan just seems like a very soft-spoken person, and it is what it is. Uh, but that's not what we have in store for Monday. And the which one had you never seen? The one we just watched is the one you hadn't seen before, or well, you can answer me, chat, when you get when the delay catches up. The things that we were just talking about, the primary value criterion, these are actually going to come up a lot in this Destiny and Muslim skeptic debate. So I'm going to leave further discussion to that. It's going to be probably the main subject of discussion regarding that debate, though there will be a few other things. I'm glad we went over the Hitchens video. Um, maybe we will watch more Hitchens stuff because there are some. As we were watching this, I can't help but browse the suggested videos, and I remembered some of the other debates I had seen of him and some of the other ideas that his debates spark conversation about. But we'll see. That'll be something going forward. The other thing I wanted to talk about is because I keep forgetting, and I almost forgot again. I was asked by how I felt about streaming so far. I am very new to this, and I hope to keep doing it. So far I've been a little surprised actually at how tiring it can be. I think that chalks up to the fact that for the most part I am talking to myself nonstop for hours on end. Uh, it's kind of weird. I do enjoy it. I've always enjoyed public speaking. I am enjoying this so far. I think I'll have more fun the more that I have chat to interact with. As of right now, I have a few people that I know personally, and I'm very appreciative for watching. But it'll be a lot more fun to have a chat to respond to, feel a little more conversational, a little less like I'm just talking to myself into the void, which I don't mind doing with these debates. In fact, that's why I'm doing so many of these debate reviews. Is it's something that I can talk to myself about, even if there's nobody watching, and it can have some value if people watch it back in the future. But I hope to not have to keep doing these for that long, or at the very least to not have that be the only thing I do because I have a chat I can react to. And I appreciate that. Thanks for saying I have a nice voice. That's very sweet. That's nice of you. Thanks, chat. Uh, so yeah, I'm enjoying it so far. It has been kind of tiring, and I'm enjoying that. And it definitely, like it was one of those like, you got to give props to people who do those long streams. But now, like doing it even a little bit and seeing like, oh, after 2 hours, I'm pretty worn out. To realize like people do 24-hour streams and sometimes more, and sometimes without sleeping, and that's incredibly difficult. Even the little bit of experience of it, you have to give them a lot of respect for being able to do it. So I appreciate all the support I'm getting in the chat. It's very kind of you. Thank you so much for the people who are watching. One of the things that's actually kind of nice to me is I kind of presume that even for the people I know that you just kind of stop watching at a certain point or stop paying attention at the very least. Just like, yeah, okay, like it's kind of boring. I get it. Uh, that you're paying attention actively enough to respond to the things I'm saying is very heartening. I appreciate it greatly. Thank you very much. And with that, I think I'm going to sign off here. So thanks so much for watching. I hope that I am also right now saying thank you to people in the future watching it back on YouTube. Thanks so much, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.